The exhausted Klein dispelled the sealed wall of spirituality, allowing the cool wind to blow onto his face. The scent of grass and trees that the wind carried revitalized him. He rubbed the warm and classic sealed artifact 3-0782 with his hands and sighed to himself. Who would have thought that there would be a drop of God's blood in this emblem? I have to assume that the experts from the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun must have tried searching for this item in the past, but couldn't find it. Klein stretched his neck. He didn't dare try anything else, keeping the mutated sun sacred emblem in the inner pocket of his windbreaker. His hand followed a chain and took out a silver vine leaf pocket watch. He opened it to see that there was still about an hour before Corpse Collector Fry's shift. I need 2 matches to prop up my eyelids. This is a side effect of that near-death experience. Klein didn't have any other ideas. All he could do was take out a small metal bottle from a tiny hidden pocket. He uncapped the bottle and brought it near his nose. A pungent smell, a mix of mint and disinfectant, quickly entered his nose, giving Klein goosebumps. His senses were jolted, making him forget his fatigue temporarily. He had learned the formula from Corpse Collector Fry. It was called Quelag's oil, and it could help a person ignore the stench of rotting corpses, as well as refresh and clear the mind. The next hour felt like torture. Klein paced around from time to time, and was bitten by the mosquitoes in the forest several times. Finally, he saw the black-haired, blue-eyed Fry walking out of the town wearing a windbreaker and holding a cane. Even though Fry still looked like a living corpse, Klein felt as though he was looking at his savior. He covered his mouth and let out a yawn, making his eyes teary. He made his way over and took out sealed artifact 3-0782 from his pocket. What happened? Fry asked as he looked at his partner's pale face. Klein sighed and said, I just did my shift at Cheney's Gate the previous night and didn't sleep too well in the morning, so I'm very tired. He didn't elaborate further and changed the subject. Shall I come for my next shift 4 hours from now? 7 hours. The captain doesn't need sleep at night. Fry took the mutated sun sacred emblem. I'm glad someone enjoys staying up late. Klein ridiculed the captain under his breath. He bade goodbye to Fry and walked towards the town. On the way back to the inn, he took out his pocket watch again and checked the time. 10 minutes earlier than we arranged. What a nice person. Klein laughed and walked faster. He returned to the inn and opened the half-closed door. The boss watched him as he made his way to the second floor before he entered his room. He removed his coat and shoes after locking the door. He didn't wash up, but instead fell directly onto the bed. His breathing became heavy in just a few seconds, then long and peaceful. In his dreams, Klein returned to Earth where he was playing a game he hadn't beaten. A cup of soda and a plate of spicy chicken wings were on his left. To his right was a bowl of rice and bitter bamboo shoots meat soup. He didn't like bitter bamboo shoots, but he liked it in soup with meat slices. The refreshing taste and the little bit of fat from the meat were tantalizing, a perfect complement to the rice. He could eat an extra bowl of rice if it was paired with some good sauce dip. Just as Klein was about to enjoy his supper and continue playing his game, his dream changed again, presenting him with the internal layout of 2, Daffodil Street. Klein suddenly became alert, aware that he was dreaming. He saw himself seated at the side of the dining table, a copy of the Tianjin Daily Tribune in his hand. In front of him was a bowl of tomato oxtail stew, pan-fried lamb chops, mashed potatoes, and wheat bread. He subconsciously turned to look at the door, suddenly noticing a figure standing outside the window of the living room, silently staring inside the house. Klein was shocked. He immediately recognized the gray-eyed Dun. Half his face was clinging close to the window as he silently watched the people inside. Captain, can you not scare someone in their dreams? Is this your way of acting as a nightmare? Klein thought, finding humor in his exasperation. He scooped up a mouthful of stew and put it into his mouth. Ah, this is my cooking. He sighed to himself. He understood why he suddenly became alert in his dream, why the scene of him on Earth vanished. He would naturally become aware when someone barged into his dreams. At this moment, Dunn left his spot by the oriel window and directly entered the house. In his black windbreaker, he came silently before Klein. He took off his hat and nodded before sitting down. He didn't stand on ceremony, picking up cutlery and quickly polishing off the stew, lamb chops, wheat bread on the table. Klein looked on dumbfounded, unsure what the captain was doing. Phew. Dunn exhaled in satisfaction and gave Klein a thumbs up. He then took out his pipe and a matchstick before taking an intoxicated puff. He exhaled a cloud of smoke and stood up. He then put on his hat and bowed before leaving the house and the dream. Klein looked at the captain's back, unable to collect himself for a long time. He looked down at the empty plates and instinctively wanted to conjure up the food he had just now. But this time, the oxtail stew, lamb chops, mashed potatoes didn't appear in his dream. It was completely eaten? A nightmare can do that? Klein twitched his lips and thought in frustration. So the captain's goal was to prevent me from eating supper in my dream? That sure is a nightmare. This method of acting as a nightmare sure is creative. He let out a laugh and exited his dream, once again falling asleep. At about 5:30 the next day, Klein, who had no choice but to wake up early, drink his coffee and eat his toast and bacon. He hurried out of town to take over from Dunn. At 7 a.m, they prepared to set off back to Tingen. It wasn't even 10 when they arrived at 36 Zutland Street. Fire sat behind the typewriter after Dunn, the most energized of the lot, returned sealed artifact 3-0782 to the back of Cheney's gate. He took advantage of the fact that the clerks hadn't arrived yet so that he could write a report on the mission and the claims of the related expenditures. Klein looked on from the side, satisfied that the items he had expended were within the list, including the materials he used to drive the bugs and mosquitoes away. He didn't return home immediately, for he had arranged to meet the asylum's Dr. Daxter at 1 p.m. at the agreed-upon venue through a coded letter. Then there's still the tarot gathering at 3. Why does the boss of a secret society have such a tiring life? Klein thought to himself. He took a 2-hour nap in the Nighthawk's break room to catch up on sleep. He didn't forget the information he had obtained the previous day. He wasn't worried that he would forget, for the information could be recalled using divination. He was afraid that he would disregard the existence of this information and even lose the ability to divine the information. Thus, he recalled the pieces of information once again before he slept to reinforce them. This was also the reason Klein insisted on doing a review every week and reorganize all the information he knew. After lunch, he took a look at his pocket watch and left the Blackthorn Security Company for the shooting club at 3 Zutland Street. Klein entered the reception area after pushing open the door, but he didn't head directly to the shooting range belonging to the Nighthawks. Instead, he found a seat in the hall as he waited patiently with his black cane in hand. He had arranged to meet Daxter at the Zutland Street Shooting Club. He had arranged this through handwritten letters. Whenever Klein needed to meet him, he would write to Dr. Daxter Guderian in place of a patient's family member and ask about a unique condition called dissociative identity disorder. In his letter, Klein would use various methods to mention the term spectator, as well as a hidden mark of ink to authenticate his identity. The letter would also casually mention a time to meet. As for the place to meet, they had already decided this the first time they met. If Klein felt that there was a need to change the location, he would mention it when they met in person. When Daxter Guderian needed to meet for non-urgent matters, he could send a letter to the Hound Pub or the Shooting Club. The recipient would be marked as Mr. Hornaces, which Klein would take at scheduled times. In urgent situations, he could hand the letter directly to the boss of the Hound Pub, Wright, and mention his search for mercenaries. This way, Wright, who was an associate of the Nighthawks, would immediately hand the letter over to the Blackthorn Security Company. After waiting for a while, Klein saw the refined Daxter enter the shooting club, a few minutes past 1. He was wearing a black hat and a fitted tuxedo. He had a cane inlaid with silver in his hands, as well as a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. Daxter walked around the club without attracting attention and saw Klein, who nodded slightly. He then retracted his gaze and walked to the counter, expertly applying for a shooting range and renting a gun. This was not his first visit. Small shooting range 7, 3 solely an hour. The fee for renting a revolver is 1 solely 7 pence per hour and it contains 6 rounds. The receptionist quickly settled the request. After Daxter confirmed that he was renting the items for an hour and paid the fee of 10 solely, he took the revolver and extra bullets and was led into the respective shooting range by the facilitator. Klein waited another 5 minutes before slowly standing up. He grabbed his cane before walking to the small shooting range 7 and knocked on the door. The door opened a tiny crack with a creak. Daxter first looked around cautiously, then opened the door fully. Klein immediately entered and locked the door. "Good afternoon, Mr. Daxter," he said as he took out a 10 solely bill. He handed the bill over to Daxter. "We wouldn't let our associates bear any extra fees. Because I can claim compensation," he added in his heart. Daxter didn't decline. He took the cash and asked heavily, "Mr. Moretti, why did you ask to meet me?" Klein obviously couldn't just bring up the telepathist formula right at the start. However, he didn't hide his intention either. After all, the man opposite him was a spectator. He wouldn't be conned so easily. "Has Eugen behaved unusually recently?" He first asked Daxter Guderian about the patient in the asylum who was a member of the psychology alchemists. Daxter examined Klein's eyes, expression, and gestures. He thought and said, "No, he's acting normal. Frankly speaking, I think if he really wanted to leave the asylum, he could immediately behave in a very healthy and very normal manner. But he hasn't done so, and he continues to stay in the asylum. He appears to be treating every patient. Yes, patients who exhibit chaotic, violent, or abnormal thoughts appear to be getting better. Maybe Eugen is trying to train his beyonder powers with this method." Psychiatrist, sequence 7 that corresponds to spectator? Perhaps even higher. Since Eugen isn't a doctor in the asylum but entered as a patient, it means that he hasn't truly grasped the acting method. It should be as Daxter has guessed, he's probably training his beyonder skills and doing so resembles that of the acting method. To a certain extent, it could slow down the potion's negative influence. Hence, Eugen decided to just take the asylum as his home. Klein openly showed that he was in deep thought regarding Eugen's matter. Because that would make Daxter Guderian feel that he knew and understood a lot, making him appear unfathomable. With this in mind, Klein guessed something else. The psychology alchemists hadn't grasped the acting method. After all, even a mainstay member at the Sequence 7 was unaware of this. In this era with few beyonders, a Sequence 7 was considered mid-level in any secret organization. They were important enough to know crucial matters, especially those that could help members resist the loss of control. Plus, the Psychology Alchemists was a secret organization that had only been established in the last 300 years or even earlier. It was understandable that they hadn't grasped or deduced the acting method. The only organization that brought up the method explicitly was the Secret Order. They were an ancient organization that had more than 1,500 years of history and could be traced back to the previous epoch. Hey, the Church of the Goddess is even older than the Secret Order. Just the letter of saints from the Revelation of Evernight clearly indicates that it's nearly 3,000 years old. That's not to mention the mythical legends before that. How could such an ancient church not discover the acting method? During the long history of a huge organization, there must have been members who experimented with various possibilities, just like Spirit Medium Daily. They might not have understood the principle of the acting method in detail, but they acted out the name of the potion correctly anyway. They would have discovered the gist of it through the good feedback they received. As that accumulates through the generations of Nighthawks, unless the higher-ups were a bunch of curly-haired baboons, it would be impossible to deduce the acting method. Klein's thoughts made the connection and was suddenly shocked. To the Nighthawks who didn't know of the acting method, someone like Spirit Medium Daily was a genius, an example that an ordinary member couldn't emulate. Hence, no one suspected that the experience of Daily and others could be adapted for their own use. But to those who have grasped the acting method, this would be extremely odd. Klein believed that in the long history of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Spirit Medium Daily was definitely not the first member to have used the acting method to digest the low-sequence potions quickly. She might not even be in the top 10 or top 50. It doesn't make sense. Unless Daily didn't understand the acting method on her own, but had other people's guidance. Then, it could be concluded that every member of the Holy Cathedral follows the beliefs of the past, believing in their predecessors' experience, and not daring to rebel against their teaching. After all, rebelling would imply the loss of control most of the time. Yes, other than this explanation, there is another possibility. The higher-ups of the church have hidden the acting method for some reason. I need to flip through some records and search for examples of Beyonders in the Church of the Evernight Goddess digesting their potions quickly, as well as their final outcome. Klein thought with a mask of solemnity. Daxter looked at him, waited for a few minutes, and asked curiously, "Officer, is there some sort of problem with Hudyugen's actions?" "Not right now. It just made me think of other matters," Klein replied, smiling. He cast his suspicions aside. He asked instead, "Has there been any actions taken by the psychology alchemists recently?" "No, besides a small gathering in Awa to exchange items and experience," Daxter answered honestly. Klein nodded slightly and said, "How about your own situation?" Daxter controlled his expression as he replied, "Not too good myself. I still hear some ravings and have some illusions. If I wasn't a doctor specializing in mental health, I might even think that I have some sort of disorder." As he spoke, his face grew solemn. "I followed Hudyugen's and your instructions to ignore those illusions and ravings. That made me feel much better, but they still affect my sleep, and I have become more grumpy and short-tempered. I'm not like myself, as though another new me is growing from within, or maybe it could be described as a new character. I'm very worried and terrified that I might suddenly lose control one day." Just as I have predicted, I didn't even need to divine to see that coming. Having prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, "You don't have to worry, you're a subsidiary member of the Nighthawks now. There are benefits for you. As an ancient organization, we master many methods to keep one from losing control. It isn't 100% effective, but it will definitely help you. Besides, I'm willing to share with you my personal experience. You must know the man standing before you only used a month to shake off the shackles of illusions and ravings, and they haven't resurfaced. You should know from Hudyugen and your other cadres that doing so is very difficult." For Sequence 8 telepathist, Klein bragged a little. "Officer, there's a bit of a lie in what you said, but it's mostly the truth," Daxter suddenly said calmly. "What do you want from me?" "It's tough to lie to a spectator." Klein replied with a smile, "It's not something that only I want to get. Miss Justice wants it too." Of course, he knew that Daxter would definitely assume that the Nighthawk squad wanted something. "If your method is really effective, and the items or information you want is within my reach." Daxter weighed his words as he spoke. "I will give you the perks in advance," Klein said straightforwardly. "We want the telepathist formula." He wouldn't hide the potion formula but inform the captain as well. He would tell the captain that Daxter used it in exchange for his personal experience on bringing the potion under control. During the procedure, Klein would definitely verify the formula and accidentally memorize it in his head. Besides, he would use the fact that he used his personal experience in exchange for the formula to earn merit with the Nighthawks. By then, with his previous merits, he might not even need to put an extra effort to apply for the clown formula and main ingredients. A formula for 2 deals, quite a good bargain. Klein thought happily. Daxter looked into his eyes and kept quiet for a while before he said, "You're very frank. I'll try my best to get the formula, but I'm not sure how long it'll take me. If it gets too dangerous, I hope that I can replace it with something else." "No problem." Klein didn't intend to force the request on the man. He then described the acting method vaguely. "The key to resisting the loss of control lies within the name of the potion. We have to understand it and learn its true meaning. You can't completely understand it by thinking about it. It must be understood through experience. For instance, as a spectator, you have to understand that you're only a spectator, not an actor. How a spectator should act is something that you need to discover through attempts and experimentation to deduce the principles required of you. From there, adhere to it strictly. Daxter listened attentively. Then, he replied, "That's a brand new way to look at things." I'm willing to use the word theory to describe what you just said. This is just like a theory of a play and opera. I'll try, and I hope it'll help. If it really works, I'll do my best to get you the telepathist formula. May the goddess protect you. Klein drew a crimson moon on his chest. Klein didn't request the potion formula of psychiatrist as well, because he knew that it was a task that Daxter couldn't complete with his current position. He might end up exposing him if he wasn't careful. Thus, he planned to take it one step at a time by helping Daxter achieve a higher position in the psychology alchemist slowly. Then, the long-term benefits would be abundant. Klein looked outside through the peephole in the door, then he left quickly and turned to the small shooting range that was designated for the Nighthawks. He entered and locked the door. His face grew grave once again. When he was guessing the reason why the Church of the Goddess hadn't developed the acting method, he realized another thing that he had overlooked. He had overlooked it because he had obtained two crucial factors in reverse order. It made him fail to make a further consideration. The first matter was that the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. The second matter was that the Antigonus family had the seer sequence in its grasp, or at least, most of it. As there was a very long period of time between when Klein learned the two facts, he almost didn't piece them together. Hence, he overlooked something that should have been pretty obvious. Since the Antigonus family had grasped a majority of the sequences of the seer pathway, how is it possible that the Church of the Evernight Goddess only received sequence 9 seer? They should have obtained more than that as the spoils of war. If a member from the Aurora Order got a hold of the clown formula from the Antigonus family's magical notebook, then what about the church that destroyed the entire Antigonus family? Even if the Antigonus family was well prepared and hid their most valuable things at the highest peak of Hornacis Mountain, the Church of the Evernight Goddess shouldn't have gained so little. They were the ones who killed the family members of Antigonus family. Furthermore, the dead can be made to speak. Klein paced around the small shooting range as he pondered over the intent of the Church of the Evernight Goddess regarding the seer pathway. Do they not want Nighthawks to choose this pathway, or do they not want Beyonders to become powerful through this pathway? As such, they only revealed the sequence 9 seer, which is clearly a support type. Captain also mentioned that the Holy Cathedral might have the subsequent recipes. No, they didn't even provide the names of the potions for sequence numbers 8 and 7 in the confidential information that I read. They merely described the battle characteristics of each sequence. In other words, they don't want those under them to realize that the church might hold the actual formulas. Is there a possibility that Nighthawks who chose this pathway could become vengeful spirits for the Antigonus family, and thus, the higher-ups of the church made a decision like this? Or could there be some other reason? Klein suddenly felt incredibly suspicious, a sense of intense wariness and vigilance, towards the higher-ups of the church. He began reconsidering whether he should openly hand over the special application to become a clown. If there are some terrifying secrets behind this, wouldn't I be jumping into the fire myself? Frankly, I'm not a person that can be placed under strict investigation. But the Tingen branch has handed the clown potion formula over to the church. Any seer who learned of this would hope to advance. Isn't that normal? Sequence 8 is still considered a low sequence, so it shouldn't invite too much attention. The only problem is that I would only take a month to completely digest the potion and submit a special application. If the higher-ups are familiar with the acting method, they would be able to realize what I did immediately. Of course, I do have an excuse. I know spirit medium daily after all. Old Neil, who is strict in abiding by the mystery prior's maxim, is also my friend. The claim that I gained inspiration from them and refined the acting method isn't too hard to believe. Yes, even Daly received attention from the higher-ups only after showing signs of digesting a sequence 7 potion in 3 years, and is now being nurtured to become a future archbishop. Being at the stage of clown shouldn't garner me too much attention, unless I fully digest the clown potion in a few months. giving them confirmation to believe that I have truly mastered the acting method. In other words, applying for the clown potion isn't a risky move. I can continue with that plan, but I should pay attention to this in the future. Sigh, I'll have to take things one step at a time. I'll do a divination back at home. Klein collected himself and took out his revolver from his holster before carrying on with his daily shooting practice and maintenance. The quality of the revolver that he had gotten from his schoolmate, Welch, was unexpectedly good. Without any surprise, it would last for quite some time. Of course, he had to credit Dunn and Leonard for teaching him how to maintain a revolver. To be honest, it doesn't matter if it's damaged. These are all things I can request compensation for. Klein looked at the target, put away his revolver, and left the shooting club. He took the public transport back to 2 Daffodil Street. Before arriving at his destination, he saw a young lady pacing about his door. This lady was dressed in a blue lacy dress, as well as a thinly veiled hat. She was Melissa's classmate, Elizabeth, who had her adorable baby fat. She quickly approached when she saw Klein arrive, taking off her hat to reveal her joyful face. She paused for 2 seconds before smiling. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. I'm guessing that you just came back from Lamud Town, right?" "I'm sorry, I came back in the morning." Klein smiled. "No, I came from Zutland Street." Yes, that was a very honest answer. He laughed to himself. Elizabeth froze for a moment, then said with excitement, "All right, I guessed wrongly. I came to look for you because I wanted to tell you that I didn't have that nightmare last night. I no longer dreamed about the knight in black armor. This was exactly the same as the result of your divination. Of course, that wraith was completely purified by sealed artifact 3-0782. I couldn't channel his spirit even if I was there, much less your dream." Klein laughed and replied gently, "I'm happy that you're freed from your troubles. I'm also very satisfied with my divination yesterday." Thank you once again." "Alright, I have to go now, I still have lessons in the afternoon." "Bye-bye, Mr. Moretti. I'll visit Melissa when I have the time." Elizabeth left joyfully, renting a carriage by the side of the road. As the carriage began to roll forward, she smiled and thought proudly, "Melissa definitely doesn't know how great her brother is. It seems as though my explanation just now was useless. Young ladies would rather trust their intuition and the truths made up in their minds." Klein saw Elizabeth board the carriage and opened the door to his house. He made his way to his room. He rested for a while before he began to consolidate everything that had happened over the past week, including the questions he had yet to resolve. After completing the task, he burned his notes, took out his pocket watch, and opened it. 2:30? There's another 15 minutes left. Seeing that he still had time, Klein put on his oldest suit and headed to Smyron Bakery at Iron Cross Street to buy a cup of sweet iced tea from Mrs. Wendy. He drank his beverage as he returned, then sealed his room with a wall of spirituality at 15 minutes to 3. He then took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the world above the gray fog. In the quiet, ancient palace, Klein conjured a piece of goatskin and wrote down a divination statement: "I should obtain the clown potion through the nighthawks." He put his pen down and untangled the spirit pendulum on his wrist. He grabbed the pendulum firmly with his left hand, allowing the topaz to be suspended right above the piece of paper. He recited the statement 7 times. His eyes darkened and the pendulum in his hand started to turn. It turned clockwise. It's a positive answer, so it's appropriate. But it'll be hard to say for the sequences after clown. I should seriously develop my tarot club. Klein did another divination to confirm the answer. After this, he used his hand and pressed down on the dark red star representing the sun. He wanted to bring the youth from the City of Silver in early and ask if he revealed whatever had happened in this world to the 6-member council. If he hadn't, then Klein would give him a better way of knowing what time the gatherings would start. In a room of the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek sat silently by the side of his bed, waiting for the fool's summoning. In order to avoid being near anybody, he didn't even go out of the house after he returned. He had nearly finished all the food in his room. Bearing with the hunger and hearing the growls of his stomach, Derek felt as though he was a living corpse roaming around on a dark plain. However, he remained silent, nor did he stand. At that moment, he saw a dark red color spread in the air, quickly swallowing him. The gray, boundless, cold, lonely world appeared in his field of vision once again. Seated at the seat of honor, the fool, who was obscured by the thick fog, presented himself in front of him once more. Klein was satisfied that his summoning wasn't interrupted. He also confirmed that he didn't face any immediate danger. "Son, we meet again," he said smilingly, using Jotun. Derek was shocked by what had happened. He lowered his head. "You are a fool who keeps his word. The other members will arrive in a while. Before that, I'll confirm a few things with you first." Klein used the loan language this time, but willed the mysterious space to translate it into Jotun. The words rang through the air, coming to Derek in Jotun. He asked curiously, "What's the matter?" "Well, now that I've gained a certain degree of mastery over Jotun, the mysterious space above the gray fog can translate whatever I say in real time. This means that I won't have to worry about justice and the hanged man not understanding whatever son says. Sigh, why does a boss like me have to work so tirelessly?" Klein pinched the bridge of his nose. He laughed and shook his head. "I'll permit you to recite my name. Remember the incantations I'm going to tell you." The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Derek's pupils constricted when he heard that, but he didn't dare to get distracted. He recited it over and over again in his heart, then confirmed it with the fool. "You have to use a simple ritual and recite my name whenever you return to the City of Silver. I will notify you in advance for future gatherings. You need not pay too much attention to it on other days, nor do you have to avoid anyone. When you receive my notification, isolate yourself within 1,000 heartbeats." Klein told him the method he had been deliberating on for quite some time. This was essentially a response to a prayer. As he had to consider the situation regarding the City of Silver, as well as save time, Klein opted to omit the other steps of the ritual since it was a plea directed toward him. 1,000 heartbeats? Derek muttered to himself. Klein described the general idea of the tarot club to Derek, then took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Derek froze for a while, instinctively looking at the wondrous item. When 3 approached, Klein extended his hand and pressed on the dark red stars representing justice and the hanged man. Derek didn't blink as he witnessed this. He saw light burst forth opposite and beside him, as 2 hazy figures extended from within. Audrey Hall surveyed her surroundings and froze suddenly. She then heard the ever-calm voice of Mr. Fool. "This is our newest member, his code name is Sunday. This is Miss Justice, and that is Mr. Hanged Man." "Newest member?" Audrey was shocked at first, then her shock immediately turned to joy. She was very excited to see the development of the Tarot Club. She felt like a protagonist. The hanged man Alger creased his brows, a little upset that the fool would drag in a new member so suddenly. "He should have at least mentioned it to us. But a great figure like Mr. Fool wouldn't have to care about our feelings," he thought in exasperation before giving a simple greeting to Justice and Son. In this short process, Audrey entered the her spectator state and paid close attention to the newest member Son. He should be quite young. His body language tells me that he's a little nervous and restrained. But he ultimately maintains a tolerable air of silence, giving the feeling of, a lone wolf, yes, a lone wolf. Audrey thought as she cast her gaze at the fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. She said in joy, "Mr. Fool, I've collected another 2 pages of Emperor Roselle's diary." Actually there were 3 pages, but the characters were too complicated and too difficult to memorize. My limit is only a little over 2 pages. I would mess up if I were to memorize more. The rest will have to wait until the next gathering. Audrey added in her head. New pages of Roselle's diary? Klein's mind stirred. He smiled and asked in reply when he already knew the answer, "Miss Justice, what do you need?" Audrey's eyes beamed with excitement, but she replied in a reserved manner, "You know that I'll soon fully digest the spectator potion. I hope that I can get the formula for the telepathist potion so that I can prepare the ingredients ahead of time. I know that there isn't much content for 2 pages of the diary, and it might not equal to the value of the telepathist formula, so I'll give you another page. I'll also pay you a sum of money on the side. She had yet to finish what she said when she suddenly felt that it had come out wrong. She couldn't help but berate herself in her head. Mr. Fool is at the very least an important figure which approaches that of a god. How could he be bought over by money? Hence, Audrey couldn't maintain her spectator state as she hurriedly added with a stammer, "That's not what I meant. Mr. Fool, what I meant is that you can determine the compensation that you'd like." "Yes, that's what I meant. I like your earlier suggestion. I would answer like this: when you have fully digested the spectator potion, you will get the formula you need. I have a subordinate. No, I have to use the word adorer, that sounds more awesome. He happens to be handling some matters that require money, and this is his anonymous account in Backland Bank." "Yes, then I will disguise myself and make an anonymous account in Backland Bank." Klein didn't answer immediately but weighed his words carefully with an unfathomable expression. Backland Bank was one of the 7 major banks in the Lone Kingdom, and as such, it possessed the right to clear transactions. The Lone Kingdom settled accounts with receipts to take care of cash transfer business between banks within the same city in a centralized manner. However, unlike banks in the Intis Republic, not all banks were part of the same league. The biggest 7 banks held on to these rights. Hence, they were called the clearance banks, making other banks rely on them. Transferring money from a different location, on the other hand, could only be done within the same bank. It would be completed by squaring accounts between branches. With the invention of the steam locomotive and telegram, the efficiency of these transfers had been enhanced drastically. Just then, the son, Derek Berg, suddenly spoke. "The telepathist potion formula? Telepathist that is followed by psyche analyst?" Audrey looked towards him puzzledly. "You know of it?" At the same time, Miss Justice saw a problem through her instinct as a spectator. The young man had used the ancient title psyche analyst instead of the modern term psychiatrist. This guy is very strange. Audrey examined Son's every movement. Derek didn't think that he behaved any differently but replied seriously, "I can get you the formula." Then, he felt guilty as he couldn't provide it immediately. He tried his best to explain himself. "It's a sequence pathway that stemmed from the dragon race. And our city of Silver was once ruled by the Giant King's imperial household. As you know, the giants and the dragons are sworn enemies. Hence, the city of Silver has all of sequence 9, 8, and 7. I have ways to get them. This kid. I already warned him not to speak carelessly or expose his origins." In the end, Klein nearly wanted to extend his hand to cover his face. Sigh, although the son appears to be in great pain, very mature and silent for his age, he's just a boy after all. However, that clarifies one thing for me. It turns out that the spectator sequence's origins stem from the dragon race. It's no wonder that the symbol formed by stars behind Miss Justice's high chair is the dragon. The city of Silver has preserved history well. Klein maintained his posture of leaning against the back of his chair while he listened thoughtfully to the son's description. In fact, he could have easily stopped the son from exposing those matters. As long as he didn't help in the simultaneous translation, Justice and the hanged man wouldn't have understood him at all. However, Klein took a different approach. He felt that it might help him consolidate his mighty and mysterious image in the minds of the 3 members effectively. Hence, he listened with a smile and didn't make a sound. Giant King, Dragon Race, the City of Silver. Audrey was confused. She first took a look at the hanged man opposite her, but she could tell that he was shocked and confused as well from his body language. She looked sideways towards the seat of honor on the long bronze table. She saw the fool sitting on the high chair, engulfed in thick grayish-white fog. His right arm was placed on the armrest while he leaned sideways leisurely. He showed no shock, no curiosity, no thoughts, and no doubt. He only looked at them with a smile. He knows. He knew all of this. Audrey and Alger made the definite judgment almost at the same time. The City of Silver, I've never heard of this place. Where is it? Audrey probed while Alger listened attentively. At that very moment, Derek Berg's head was filled with questions as well. He could tell that, besides the godlike fool, Justice, and the hanged man were some sort of beyonder. In the forsaken land of the gods, besides the people in the City of Silver, Derek had never seen another living human. So, he asked in reply, if you aren't residents of the City of Silver, which city-state are you from? Sigh. Klein couldn't help but wish to sigh again. Audrey trembled her lips, momentarily at a loss for words. Yes, the hidden meaning behind his question is that if you don't want to answer a similar question, don't pry into the questions about where the other person lives. Miss Justice nodded faintly and elegantly kept quiet. Obviously, Alger had misunderstood the son's intentions as well. He didn't know the other person was really just asking straightforwardly. So, he kept quiet too. When Derek didn't receive any reply, he seemed to realize what was happening. He didn't bring it up again and instead said, I will try to get the telepathist potion formula as soon as possible. I would like to use it to exchange for the beginning sequence pathway of the sun. Sun sequence pathway? Sequence 9 Bard? Alger asked in reply. Derek thought and said, probably, but I lack information about it. Klein, who was watching from the side, decided to get involved, because he didn't want to risk anyone taking his business away. He smiled and said, I believe Miss Justice doesn't have the Bard formula. But Mr. Hanged Man seems to be able to get it. Seeing Audrey nod, Klein continued with a faint smile, I will give the sun the Bard formula. The sun will pass the telepathist potion to Miss Justice as soon as possible. Try to get it done within the next 2 gatherings. Miss Justice, please pass me the new pages of Roselle's diary. Then, the deal is done. Yes, according to the law of equivalent exchange, the sun is on the losing end of this transaction, but as of now, he has only made a promise. When he really provides the telepathist formula, Miss Justice can consider how to compensate him again, or I will compensate him while Miss Justice provides money to one of my adorers who needs to do some things recently. Heh, that's because the sun might not necessarily be able to receive Miss Justice's cash or ingredients as compensation. Klein intentionally added that final statement to redirect the Hanged Man and Justice's focus onto the fact that Sun might not be able to receive her compensation. He also did that to place himself in an unfathomable position, then, everyone would ignore the adorer that lacked money. Might not necessarily receive the compensation. Where exactly is the sun? The southern continent? Alger suddenly creased his eyebrows. The origin of the sun is mysterious too. As expected, Mr. Fool does have subordinates in reality. Audrey finally saw her hope of becoming a Sequence 8 telepathist. What other thoughts could she have? She suppressed her excitement and flashed a faint smile as she said, I have no objections. Neither do I. When Derek saw that he could obtain the beginning sequence of the sun pathway, he nodded without hesitation. He couldn't care less about the additional compensation. Alger, who was out of the 3-way deal, didn't have the right to speak. Although he could get the formula of Bard, he would need to wait a week or 2 as well. At that moment, Klein, who had successfully delayed the compensation to the next gathering, or the following one after, pressed his palm forward happily. The Bard formula surfaced. Main ingredients, a crystal sunflower or an adult flint bird's tail feather or a fire bird's tail feather. A piece of siren rock or a singing sunflower. Supplementary ingredients, a blade of midsummer grass, 5 drops of July wine juice, a blade of elf dark leaf. He sent the formula before the sun and saw the young man first crease his eyebrows and then relax. Yes, the ingredients in the forsaken land of the gods will still be known by their ancient names. Luckily, my formula was obtained directly from the eternal blazing Sunday. The knowledge that I gained used ancient names and various replacements. Klein suddenly cast his eyes of realization towards Miss Justice. Audrey looked at the son who was memorizing the formula, then she quickly willed the 2 pages of the diary that she had memorized. The diary immediately appeared on the yellowish-brown goatskin and, with a flash, appeared in Klein's hands. Just like before, he started reading immediately. November 3rd, Matilda is 3 months pregnant now. I even find those maidservants who come from the villages beautiful. No, I can't lower my standards. Coincidentally, Countess Florice has invited me to join a private party, hee. November 8th, Archbishop Van Esten sought my help. What can I do for an archbishop? November 9th, it turns out that there is actually a secret hidden within sequence pathways. Archbishop Esten told me that after becoming a sequence 5 beyonder, the rest of the sequences could be replaced with sequences of the same level from 1 or 2 other pathways. In other words, it starts from the mid-sequence to high sequence. But this is only limited between those 1 or 2 pathways. If it's replaced with a potion from a wrong pathway, semi-insanity is the mildest outcome, and one can't advance any further. This way, one can begin substituting pathways from sequence 4 onwards. Sleepless and corpse collector pathways. Yes, the Church's savant and mystery prior pathways can also substitute for one another at a high sequence. Some pathways are interchangeable after sequence 5? That's different from what the Nighthawks told me. Isn't it a fact that you cannot change your pathway after you choose one? Wasn't it mentioned that diverging from your pathway would allow one to obtain strange, mysterious powers, but that person would definitely go insane and would never be able to advance? To think that there are some hidden exceptions to this. Klein looked at the diary, his pupils constricting. He didn't think that the Emperor Roselle would spout nonsense about something like this. After all, the surprise in his words were so real. But he didn't assume that the information Emperor Roselle had received was definitely correct. There was also a possibility that he had been lied to, or that he had misinterpreted the information. I will need to verify this. I'll commit it to my memory first. Klein reminded himself, then thought deeply about this. If what Roselle described here turns out to be correct, then the sequence pathways go deeper than what I imagined. It hides many secrets. The complete pathway possessed by the Nighthawks is sleepless. They also possess a relatively complete path in the corpse collector, which they have up to sequence 4. To think that those are interchangeable after sequence 5. The other potion chains they have are even less complete, as some pathways only possess the first sequence. Similarly, the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery holds the complete pathway of the savant, and has a relatively complete pathway for the mystery prior. These can also be interchanged at high sequences. Interesting. I wonder which pathway is interchangeable with the seer pathway. The apprentice or marauder that was mentioned by the Emperor? There's a high possibility that the first 5 sequence pathways of the seer pathway would each provide a separate ability, and that these abilities would be combined at sequence 4. At that stage, there should be no way to interchange it with some other potion. Klein retracted his thoughts, once again placing his attention onto the diary. He noticed that although the 2 diary pages were connected, the content was not in chronological order. The dates belonged to 2 different periods. This could be a mistake made by whoever copied their content. April 9th. The relationships between the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, the Church of the Lord of Storms, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom are poor. They see each other as enemies. The Church of the Evernight Goddess is at odds with the Church of the God of Combat from the Fasak Empire. This can be taken advantage of. These are all facts worth considering. April 13th. I participated in an ancient organization's gathering. I never expected them to be members of this organization as well. It sure was frightening. To think that the second blasphemy slate was in the hands of this organization. This is the first time I'm seeing this legendary item. Indeed, it was hiding an unimaginable secret, hee. Perhaps there will come a day when I will create a blasphemy slate unique to me. No, a set of them, with each one hiding an ultimate secret. Holy F***K, Emperor, why didn't you specify the name of this ancient organization? You're killing me. Perhaps, Roselle had a reason, or didn't dare to write down the name of the organization, even if he was using Chinese. Klein looked at the diary, a little uncomfortable and puzzled. But with this page of the diary, Klein could finally confirm that Emperor Roselle had seen the second blasphemy slate. Furthermore, he created a set of cards after that, each card represented a pathway to godhood. Yes, that could be the ultimate secret that matches each pathway to godhood. I wonder where that set of 22 cards are now. That ancient organization managed to obtain the second blasphemy slate. Klein's thoughts flowed quickly. But he quickly reined in his thoughts. He shifted his gaze away from the diary and shot it towards the hanged man, justice, and the sun. He smiled and said, "Actually, you didn't need to wait for me. It's our honor." Alger had already reined in his dissatisfaction as he answered humbly. Audrey thought for a moment before smiling. "Mr. Fool, the open selection of government officials through examinations that you described previously has already garnered the support of the King and the Prime Minister. It will soon be passed by the House of Lords and the House of Commons and is predicted to be implemented early next year." "It looks like the King and the Prime Minister still use their brains," Alger mocked out of habit. "Well, with Benson's intellect and diligence, his grammatical and accounting skills should be passable by early next year. But once it's passed by the two houses, it will definitely be announced widely by the various newspapers. I wonder how long Benson's advantage will last. The earlier the examination, the better. Sigh, there's no way Benson can triumph over the elites who graduated from the various universities in such a short period of time. But he need not compete against them, the positions they're fighting for wouldn't be the same. Those people might only have their sights trained on positions such as the cabinet secretary, or finance secretary." The silent Klein worried for his brother as he nodded his head with a smile. Audrey straightened her back when she saw the fool's affirmative nod. She said with a smile, "Mr. Hanged Man, you got me to check on something for you previously. I've received an answer. The King has been convinced by the Prime Minister and won't seek revenge on the Fasak Empire at the East Balam shore for the time being. I think you can now give me the extra payment that you promised me." Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "Miss Justice, thank you for your answer. This eases my concerns over certain things. What kind of extra payment do you want?" "I'll consider it if it's within reason." Audrey smiled, obviously prepared. Clues to the psychology alchemists, or clues to the main ingredients of the potion telepathist. Of course, that can wait until after the sun hands the formula over to me. "No problem," Alger said without hesitation. 2 seats away from the hanged man, Derek Berg couldn't understand a single word. He was very confused, feeling that he only understood a few terms, but couldn't string them together to provide any logical sense. A method of selecting officials through examination? A King and Prime Minister, House of Lords, House of Commons, East Balam Shore, Fasak Empire, psychology alchemists? He understood none of that. Fasak, the root of the word came from Jotun. What connection did it have with the fallen giant king's imperial household? Derek looked at Justice and the hanged man, suddenly having the feeling that they might not come from the same world. Could there be another city-state, or one that had formed a nation, somewhere far away from the city of silver in the cursed lands? Derek remained silent and listened on. He had a faint understanding of why the mysterious fool mentioned that he might not be able to receive the monetary compensation Justice was going to give him. To be able to gather people this far away from each other, disregarding the terrifying monsters hiding in the darkness of the cursed lands, the fool might really be a god, an ancient god, he thought. After accomplishing everything that she set out to do, Audrey wanted to become a silent observer, but she suddenly remembered something. She spoke in a hurry. "I recently came into contact with a Beyonder Circle and found out about a powerful person named Mr. A. Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, Mr. Sun. Do you know of this person's background and identity?" "I don't even know what you're talking about." Derek maintained his silence. "Mr. A? I only know a Mr. Z. With such a similar code name, could he also be from the Aurora Order?" Klein made a guess, but didn't give an answer. He had to maintain his image and try not to give answers he wasn't confident in. If he had to, he would give a vague description just like a charlatan. Alger looked at the fool and found him calm and unchanging. It was hard to read his true thoughts. Thus, he said in a deliberative tone, the Aurora Order is at odds with the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, so members of these churches understand the Aurora Order more than any other organization. And I happen to know something about them. You need not explain, I know that you come under the Lord of Storms. Of course, you could be a whistleblower. But why would there be hatred between the Aurora Order and the three ancient churches? Klein smiled but didn't speak. He looked calmly at the hanged man. Alger knew that he couldn't hide his sequence pathway from the fool, but didn't pay too much attention to it and continued. The Aurora Order has 5 saints and 22 oracles. These oracles use the alphabet as their code names, such as Mr. A or Mr. X. They are Beyonders, with the weakest being sequence 7 and the strongest sequence 5. They are all adept at hiding themselves. Should an oracle die, a new oracle will take their place. I cannot guarantee that the Mr. A you spoke of is the Mr. A from the Aurora Order, but there is a good possibility. As for the details of the Aurora Order, I have mentioned that to you before. Audrey nodded, becoming even more cautious of Mr. A. She said, feeling a little pinch in her heart, "Thank you for your answer, Mr. Hanged Man. You need not make a payment anymore." "No, I wish to ask for your help with the answer just now, as well as provide extra compensation," Alger said with a deep voice. "What help?" Audrey asked curiously. Alger thought for a few seconds before saying, "I received intelligence that the pirate Kalangos, codenamed Rear Admiral Hurricane, has secretly gone onshore and infiltrated Backland. I don't know what he's up to, but I hope that you can help me locate his whereabouts. As for whatever happens afterwards, you need not put yourself in danger." Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos? One of the 7 great admiral pirates? Audrey widened her eyes, almost unable to maintain her spectator state. What was the thing she wanted to do the most after she became a Beyonder? It was, of course, to interact with the people that only existed in the fables of the nobles. Yes, he's a sequence 6 Beyonder of the Path of the Sailor, a windblast. He also has a miraculous item that could be classified as a sealed artifact. He's quite crafty and cruel. Don't attempt to deal with him, Alger introduced seriously. He suddenly turned to Klein. "Mr. Fool, can I get your adorer to assist me at the critical moment? I would pay a price that interests you. The only adorer I have is myself." Klein lampooned to ease his emotions as he smiled. "That is built on the premise that my adorer happens to be in Backland." "All right." Alger retracted his gaze, a little disappointed, but also a little expectant. "What's so special about Kalangos' magical item?" Audrey asked slightly confidently. She considered it carefully and suddenly realized that she had a decent ability to locate people in Backland. Firstly, her father was one of the most wealthy, connected, and reputable nobles, while she was quite popular amongst the younger generation too. Hence, in the upper middle class of the society, she had quite a few resources to take advantage of. Secondly, the 2 Beyonders that she knew had their own circles as well. Apprentice Furs was originally a clinical doctor, and was now an author. She knew quite a number of people in the literary world and publishing industry, as well as among the middle-class doctors. Arbiter Zio Dari Cha had helped many middle-lower class people to coordinate and mediate disputes over a long period of time. She was also quite famous in East Backland Borough among the working class and mafia. She had a lot of hidden channels. Plus, considering the Beyonders that they knew and their circles of influence, their ability to look for a person wasn't to be belittled. Towards Justice's question, Alger answered almost straight away without hesitation or thought. "No one knows the real name of the magical item, but the people who have come into contact with it call it the creeping hunger. Kalangos uses a living person's soul and flesh to satisfy it every other day. Otherwise, it would consume its owner as a replacement. This could be one of the most important clues to seek out Kalangos," Audrey said, creasing her eyebrows. She felt utter discomfort and extreme hatred towards any evil item that desired a living human's fresh blood and soul. Yes, but in a big city with at least 5 million people, a few vagrants going missing wouldn't be noticed, Alger reminded her. Ever since he got his hands on the creeping hunger, Kalangos has been very difficult to deal with. He was originally a windblast. He possesses great beyonder power in domains related to water, wind, and the weather. But, later on, people realized that he could drive his targets crazy, enter the dreams of others, summon light to purify a dead soul, sing to strengthen himself, and change his appearance. There's almost nothing that he can't do, Alger described in detail. We suspect that those are all effects that came from the magical item, creeping hunger. Before he finished sharing, Derek Berg, who had been listening quietly, suddenly blurted, "Shepherd." "Shepherd? Sequence 5 of the secret suppliant and listener pathway?" Among the 6-member council in the City of Silver, there is a new elder who's a shepherd. Sun had mentioned that she's strong enough to fight against a sequence 4 expert, well, an evil spirit of the same grade. Klein's expression changed slightly, but it was covered by the gray fog. Justice wasn't paying any attention to him either. "Shepherd? Shepherd?" Justice and the Hanged Man asked in unison. One sounded completely confused while the other sounded shocked, as though they had heard the title of shepherd elsewhere before and knew something about it, but didn't understand the actual situation. Seeing that everyone was staring at him, Derek suddenly panicked a little. No matter how quiet, depressed, and vexed he was a boy after all. He hurriedly explained with a stammer, "What I meant was, the traits that the Hanged Man described were like the beyonder power of the sequence job, shepherd. Every shepherd can swallow another soul into their body, including wraiths and evil spirits. They control these souls to do their bidding with a unique method, which allows them to make use of their abilities, just like a god letting his lambs out to graze. Hence, no one knows how many powers a shepherd has. That depends on how many beyonder souls they have swallowed, and that makes them very scary. They're almost like a high-sequence beyonder. However, there are people who suspect that there's a limit to the number of souls that a shepherd can consume and let out to graze, and that the souls inside them could be replaced as well. So that's what being a shepherd means. The sequence pathway that the Aurora Order has in its control is enigmatic. No wonder they worship the true creator, no, the fallen creator. Klein was suddenly enlightened, but he didn't nod, taking on the appearance that he knew so long ago. Meanwhile, he sighed inwardly. "Son, you are a boy after all. This is very important information, very important insight. You could have exchanged it for valuable things, but you just revealed it all. Just like that." Yes, the ability demonstrated by the magical item Creeping Hunger is similar to a Sequence 5 Shepherd. I wonder if other sealed artifacts have the same powers of Beyonders? I wonder which sequence the sealed artifact 2-049, the Antigonus family's puppet, resembles. After listening to Sun's explanation, Alger seemed to have sorted out the puzzle in his mind as he nodded in silence. Audrey got even more curious and pressed. Which sequence pathway is Shepherd from? Which number is it? The secret suppliant pathway, sequence 5. Klein seized the opportunity to answer so as to demonstrate that he knew everything. Secret suppliant. Aurora Order. Audrey suddenly recalled Mr. A, who was a suspected oracle of the Aurora Order, and she immediately felt heavy-hearted. She started thinking seriously, thinking of what price she could pay in exchange for Mr. Fool to take action and rid off that disgusting fellow effortlessly. However, she couldn't think of anything that would move Mr. Fool into doing so. As expected, a figure akin to a god wouldn't be easily moved. There aren't many things and matters that would garner their interest after all. Audrey sighed. Putting her impulse aside, she nodded to the son gratefully, thanking him for giving them a new perspective on creeping hunger, so that they could deal with it more reasonably and efficiently. "Mr. Hanged Man, I'm willing to accept the mission. But I can't guarantee if I can find Rear Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos." Audrey looked opposite her when she spoke. "There's no better answer than this. Regardless of your success, as long as you try, I will definitely compensate you with things like secret information or intelligence. And if you succeed, maybe I could provide you the telepathist's main ingredients directly. Of course, the prerequisite is that we have to know what it is," Alger promised generously, which was a rare sight. "Deal," Audrey pursed her lips and replied with a faint smile. Then, Alger created Kalango's portrait with Klein's permission and assistance. He was one of the 7 major pirate admirals. He had a distinctive broad chin, brown hair tied into a bun at the back of his head like an ancient warrior, and green eyes that seemed to hint at laughter, but were abnormally cold. After they finished their discussion and shared their insights, Klein smiled as he announced the ending of the gathering. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man get up swiftly from their seats and bow while the sun mimicked their motions, only slower. He pressed forward with his right hand and severed the connection, but he didn't leave immediately. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek looked at his familiar surroundings and glanced outside at the dark sky that had flashes of lightning. He was momentarily thrown into a trance. But he soon jolted to his senses. He searched for goatskin and a quill before writing down the bard formula he memorized. He looked at it several times and was finally certain that there was nothing wrong with it. Derek wasn't worried that possessing the bard formula and becoming a different Beyonder would gain the suspicion of the upper echelons of the City of Silver. This was because in past exploratory expeditions, members of those elite troops would often collect some formulas, ingredients, and strange artifacts from the monsters in the abandoned and destroyed cities. During this process, it was normal that people kept some of the loot privately. As long as it didn't involve anything too important, the captains and higher-ups would tacitly overlook it. Over time, some formulas started going around through non-official channels within the City of Silver. Some became the foundation of strong families from generation to generation. The things of the dark surrounding the City of Silver were relatively fixed. Some ingredients could be obtained easily while some could only be encountered if one went far into the cursed land. Putting aside the goatskin, Derek recalled the mysterious fool's instructions. Hence, in his simple bedroom, he lowered his head and simply prayed. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Jotun was a very ancient language. It came equipped with the mystical properties demanded by rituals, prayers, and spell casting. Therefore, Derek didn't need to change the incantations into ancient Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Klein, who was seated at the seat of honor at the long bronze table, suddenly heard prayers reverberating in his ears. He then saw the crimson star that corresponded to sun blinking. He didn't try to touch it, but planned to reply to him 10 minutes before the next gathering so that the City of Silver youth would make preparations to be alone. The most important part was for him to evade the conversion of time and date, to decrease the possibility of damaging Fool's mighty image. After he confirmed that, Klein wrapped himself up with spirituality and stimulated a descent. Returning to his room, Klein removed the spirituality wall and took a break before he got ready to head out again. It wasn't necessary for him to play the role of a seer, and he didn't have to fix his trip to the divination club into his daily schedule. He would only visit occasionally to make some extra pocket money and fulfill his supervision as a nighthawk. Originally, Klein wanted to laze around through the entire afternoon, but he suddenly thought of something that he had yet to do. So, he had no choice but to gather himself up. According to his appointment, he had to pay Detective Henry a visit that day and accept the final report about the Red Chimney investigation. Sigh. I've heard that the big-timers are all quite busy. I still have to spare some time to go to the Tingen Family Servant Assistance Association with Benson and Melissa to look for a good maidservant. Klein unwillingly changed his shirt, put on his black tuxedo, and held his silk top hat and silver-inlaid cane before walking out the door like a gentleman. At Basic Street, under Henry's private detective company, Klein put on a mask and lowered his hat as he went across the street quickly and entered the stairway. In the office of the private investigator. Sir, your request has been completed, Detective Henry said to the gentleman in front of him with his hoarse voice. He heaved a sigh of relief. This wasn't an easy mission, nor was it too difficult, but it used up a great deal of our resources and energy. To be honest, I'm a little regretful. I regret setting too low a price for this mission. No matter what you say, I will not pay a single penny more. Klein emphasized in his heart. He pointed at the thick stack of documents on the coffee table and asked, "Is this the investigation report?" "Yes." Henry pressed on the report that had at least 60 pages and sighed. This is the most troublesome report that I've completed. He hadn't even finished his sentence when he saw Klein hand over £4 in cash. His attention shifted to determining the authenticity of the notes. This is the remainder of the fees. Klein held the thick stack of notes. Henry coughed. You sure are a gentleman that keeps to his word. Sigh. I didn't expect the investigation report to use this many pieces of paper. It was completely out of my budget. At that moment, Klein took the thick investigation report and stood up. He gave a slight bow and immediately made his way to the door with his cane in hand. Detective Henry's last sentence was left stuck in his throat. Hey, how can you expect me to pay for the paper used in the investigation report? That should be included in the fees already. Klein touched the £5.8 solely he had left and muttered in his heart. He walked quickly on to Basic Street. He surveyed the surroundings and confirmed that no one was paying attention to him before leaving the place. He found an opportunity to remove his mask. Klein didn't intend to head home right away. He wanted to search for a cafe and organize the investigation report. He wanted to find the houses that had a change in tenants after divining the red chimney. He could then conduct his search before dinner. There were many cafes in the area, but none of them met Klein's criteria. Ever since steam and machinery became the symbol of the times, more and more cafes had toned down on their decor and become something like cheap restaurants. They provided refreshments, coffee, bread, and dishes like pea and mutton stew to the busy workers. Thus, respectable ladies and gentlemen no longer went to cafes to discuss things. They no longer viewed these actions as being symbolic of their status. Various clubs started appearing and replaced cafes as a place for socializing. After some time, Klein finally found a cafe that had a decent atmosphere. He sat in a secluded corner and took a sip of his 1-penny Southville coffee before flipping open the investigation report. In Tingen City's North Borough, South Borough, East Borough, West Borough, Golden Indus, Harbor Borough, and University Borough, there are a total of 1179 buildings that have a dark red chimney. Along the outskirts of Tingen City, there are a total of 546 buildings with the red chimney the requester described. This doesn't include buildings in towns or villages that are relatively further away despite them falling under the jurisdiction of Tingen. Below are the addresses and tenant records of each of those buildings. As per the request, the activities within the last 3 months are recorded in more detail. Klein flipped through page after page, occasionally making notes on paper he brought around with a fountain pen. Finally, when he found the type of red chimney he had seen, he realized that there was a change of tenants in 25 buildings. That's not too many. I should try to finish my investigations within 2 days. After all, I've seen that red chimney and parts of the house in my dream. My spiritual sense would have a feeling of familiarity when I see those signs again. I'll confirm the target that way. In other words, I'm a living investigation machine. Klein nodded. He split the buildings based on their location and planned to investigate 15 of them that day. He didn't need to do a divination to get an answer if these investigations would prove dangerous. Since there was a change of tenants, that would mean that the mastermind behind the coincidences had already left. Let's hope that the new tenants know what the previous tenants look like. But since the person behind the scenes can control my fate without anyone noticing, to the point of making the coincidences feel so natural, he would definitely have a way to remove any traces he might have left behind. Sigh, I can only pray to the goddess and hope that he left behind some sort of clue. Klein sighed. He pumped himself up and put on his hat. He then grabbed his cane and the report before leaving the cafe. Klein spent 2 solely on a rented carriage and visited 15 buildings with the red chimneys before dinner. Unfortunately, none of the buildings was the one he saw in his dream. It would be quite troublesome if tomorrow's investigation yields the same result. He might still be living in the house with the red chimney even after I saw it in my divination. This could say that he is very confident and isn't afraid of my investigation. In fact, he might not even be afraid of the Tingen Nighthawks. Or perhaps, he doesn't know that he's been exposed. That would mean that the power resisting my divination was a power not belonging to him. Klein stood in front of 2 Daffodil Street and analyzed the various possibilities. A few minutes later, he patted down his tuxedo and pressed on his hat before taking out his key and entering the house with a smile. He intended to prepare stewed mutton and honey-glazed barbecue for Benson and Melissa that night. At 11 in the evening, the siblings bade each other good night and returned to their respective rooms. Klein closed the door to his room and stood before his desk. He looked outside the oriel window with the light of his gas lamp. At that moment, the streets were engulfed in darkness, with only a few street lamps illuminating the way. Stars dotted the screen that was the night sky. There were many stars, they were just not clearly visible. I wonder what Backland is like, with its titles of the land of hope and the capital of capitals. Klein muttered to himself. He extended his hand to grab his curtain, intending to draw it. Woo! At that moment, a sinister wind blew at him without warning. The light from his lamp turned a dark green. Klein subconsciously took a few steps back. His occupational instincts made him tap his left molars twice. At the same time, he leaned toward the bed and tried to reach for his revolver under his pillow. In his vision, a face suddenly protruded from the wall above the desk and under the gas lamp. It was a translucent face without any eyes or nose. All it had was a mouth. Do not fire. The face with a mouth spoke. It can communicate? Klein already had his revolver in hand as he took aim. What do you want? He asked in a deep voice. The face chuckled. I'm Daly. Daly? Spirit medium Daly? The spirit medium Daly who was sent to the Backland diocese? Klein raised his brows in doubt. Madam Daly? I know that this method of visiting you is a little rude. I should have given you a warning so you could make the necessary preparations. But it isn't convenient for me to meet you right now, and so, I can only communicate with you using this little guy. The translucent face laughed. Even though the voice is different and jarring, the manner of speech is indeed Madam Daly's style. The abilities of a spirit medium sure are cool. Klein reflected wistfully. He didn't lower his revolver as he asked, Madam, what do you want to talk about with me? If I were you, I would first seal the bedroom with spirituality. Otherwise, your family members might think of you as crazy. The translucent face quipped, you need not be so cautious. I came back to Tingen in secret because of Dunn's letter. You know that a Nighthawk cannot leave the area they are assigned to at will. The captain's letter? Klein didn't approach the desk. Instead, he felt for the holy night powder he had in the hidden pocket of his black windbreaker. Dunn and I are both beyonders that started with the Tingen Nighthawks. We have always maintained a good relationship. Last Thursday, yes, Thursday, he sent me a letter and mentioned you. He said that you emulated the maxim of a mystery prior, came up with a set of rules for a seer, and claimed that it was effective in helping you grasp your potion. From then on, you no longer hear sounds and see visions that you shouldn't. Dunn said that it was similar to what I did. Are you not going to seal the room? I personally do not mind your brother and sister misunderstanding. The translucent face said at an adequate pace. So that's the reason. She's indeed Madam Daly. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, pushing the holy night powder back into the inner pocket. He then walked to the desk and took out the silver dagger he used for rituals from the drawer. He quickly built up a wall of spirituality before turning to the protruding face. Madam Daly, what else did the captain talk about in the letter? He only expressed his own confusion and said that he seemed to understand something, yet, he couldn't describe it clearly. He hoped to get my opinion on the matter, Daly said with the help of the face without eyes. And when I read the letter this morning, I knew that you aren't as clueless as you pretend to be. Mr. Moretti, I think that you have deduced the acting method. That's the reason you came looking for me? Klein neither confirmed nor denied her statement. Daly clearly knows about the acting method. He calmly made the judgment. Daly's translucent face revealed a slight smile. Yes. I believe that we should be honest with each other. I know that you have deduced the acting method, and you also know that I grasped the acting method as well. Sigh. But what's making me unhappy is that I used nearly 2 years to understand it, yet, you've only been a Beyonder for 1.5 months. Klein fell silent for a while after hearing Daly. He then smiled honestly. That's because I have you as my role model. He wanted to say that he was standing on the shoulders of giants, but ultimately decided not to give the Emperor Roselle a chance to appear in the conversation. Klein's reply made Daly chuckle. The translucent face with only a mouth said, even though you found inspiration through the maxim of the mystery priors and confirmed your theories through my experience and performance, it only took you a month to understand the acting method and come up with your own seer principle. That shows that you possess outstanding wisdom and an open mind. Klein didn't engage in the topic, which made him guilty, but instead asked in response, Madam, do the higher-ups in the church know about this so-called acting method? No doubt, they understand it very clearly. I once read through the historical information in the church and searched through stories of people ignoring the norms and advancing quickly. I realized that there were more than a few nighthawks and bishops who have done so. I'm not the most unique one either. But their ending. Daly intentionally paused, and she suddenly sounded heavy-hearted. What kind of ending did they have? Klein asked, feeling a tug at his heartstrings. Could it be that the Church of the Evernight Goddess views the acting method as the seduction of some devil or evil god? The translucent face suddenly laughed. Their endings were rather great. Besides the few who lost control or were sacrificed in Beyonder incidents, the rest of them have at least become archbishops or high-ranking deacons. Among them, there are also experts that have successfully become high-sequence Beyonders. In the Church of the Goddess, sequence 4s and sequence 3s are called saints, while sequence 2s and sequence 1s are called grounded angels. Of course, every angel was once a saint. Madam Daly, you deliberately tried to scare me earlier. The corner of Klein's lips twitched before he asked, without hiding his suspicions, since the church has mastered the acting method, why didn't they just tell every nighthawk? Although it wouldn't prevent every nighthawk from losing control, it would definitely lower the probability and reduce unnecessary losses. A sense of loss appeared on the translucent face. I have no idea why either. They told me that when I become an archbishop or high-ranking deacon, I'll be able to know the secret. I came here today because I hope that you can tell Dunn about the acting method more clearly before you hand in your special request. Klein wasn't stupid enough to ask why she couldn't do that herself. Instead, he said thoughtfully, once noticed by the church, one has to swear not to tell anyone about the acting method. Yes, you must do it before the goddess's holy items and swear upon her name. That holds enough binding force. Trust me, you definitely don't want to know the outcome of a violation. I can only talk about it with people who have mastered the acting method, like you. Your body language already gave me the answer before you replied, that's why I dared to say the term. Daly made the creepy face sigh. She paused for a moment before saying, I only faintly grasped the essence of acting back then and digested the potion very quickly. Yes, among the higher-ups in the church, using the term digesting to describe the control of the potion is very aptly worded. Anyway, before I made the pledge and found out about the acting method, I had no clear understanding of it, so I couldn't accurately explain it to Dunn and the others. I gave up at first. I never thought that I would meet you, an eccentric wonder that could clearly understand the acting method before handing in a special application, no, a genius. So that's how you see me, madam. The corner of Klein's mouth twitched before he solemnly promised, I originally intended to remind Captain about the existence of the acting method through my special application. With your explanation, I don't have to worry further. Very well, you're such a kind lad. Daly sounded relaxed. Madam, you're only about 2 to 3 years older than me. Klein inwardly pointed out the error in her words. Without him speaking any further, the translucent creepy face continued, if you have any problems or anything that you require assistance with, you can write a letter to me. Wait for me, heh. When I become an archbishop or a high-ranking deacon, which allows me to understand why the church hides the acting method, I'll give you a hint whether if it's a good or bad thing. Klein was suddenly energized, and he asked without hesitation, "Madam, what's your address?" To him, the more help he got, the merrier. Plus, she was a pretty strong spirit medium. Seeing that Klein didn't oppose the idea at all, Daly remained silent for a while before she laughed. "Our communication shouldn't go through the post office, as we would be using normal letters. That's very dangerous. I'll teach you a relatively easy ritualistic magic. You can use it to summon a special spirit, one that belongs to me. Pass the letter to it, and it'll send it precisely to me. It wouldn't be faster than a telegram, but it's faster than a steam locomotive. If you were to send a message at noon, I would receive the message in Backland that same night." Klein listened to her with his full attention. He nodded faintly. "A very pragmatic ritualistic magic." Daly chuckled. "The uniqueness of the ritualistic magic is to pray to yourself. Obtaining power from your own spirituality, without going through a god. Hence, it's quite secretive, but it isn't very powerful. First, you select a herb and essential oil in the corresponding domain. This is no different than normal ritualistic magic. However, you only need the candle that represents yourself. Then, regarding the spell, there are 3 parts. The first part is I shout I in either ancient Hermes, Jotun, Dragonish, or Elvish. The second part is I summon in my name. That part can be said in Hermes. The third part is the exact description of the summoning object. For instance, you would use this in the future, the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the higher dimensional creature that a human orders, the messenger that belongs to Daily Simone. Higher dimensional? In mysticism, this is normally referred to as the spirit world. Klein memorized as he analyzed the ritual procedure. In that aspect, he could barely be considered an expert. The benefit of this kind of ritualistic magic is that it avoids calling upon a god but relies purely on a person's power. It achieves various magical effects without the constraints imposed by a god's specialized domain. The problem lies in the strength of a person. A weak result for the weak, and a strong result for the strong. Klein felt that he had once again obtained new mysticism knowledge that he would have never come into contact with at his current sequence. Daly repeated the description a few times and emphasized solemnly, "Remember, don't change the actual description of the summoning object, or the ritual could easily attract a terrifying monster." "Okay." Klein nodded honestly. At the same time, he suddenly thought of something. If I were to change the description of the summoning object to the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, what would be summoned? Would it be utterly useless, or would the gray fog suddenly descend, or would I need to respond in that mysterious space? Would this help me in stirring more power from the world above the gray fog? Would it cause a terrifying chain effect? Klein still felt traces of the fear after his experimentation with the mutated sun's sacred emblem. In the end, he followed his intent and planned to divine above the gray fog before deciding whether he should make the attempt or not. He contemplated and asked out of interest, "Madam, if one were to strictly practice the acting method, how long does it take to go from sequence 8 to sequence 7, and how long from sequence 7 to sequence 6? According to the information that I've read, it varies from 3 months to 2 years for sequence 8 to sequence 7. It depends on whether you can grasp the core spirit and corresponding principle during the acting process. From sequence 7 to sequence 6, it varies from half a year to 3 years, likewise for sequence 6 to sequence 5. As for sequence 5 to sequence 4, 3 to 20 years. Daly described roughly. Klein suddenly smiled. "So madam, are you already at sequence 6? He heard from Dunn that Daly used a year's time from sequence 9 corpse collector to sequence 8 gravedigger. Then, from gravedigger to sequence 7 spirit medium, she used another year. She had been a beyonder for 5 years. In other words, Daly was at the spirit medium stage for about 3 years. Yes, that's the reason why I was transferred to Backland Diocese, the creepy translucent face answered frankly. My current occupation is a spirit guide. However, I prefer the name spirit medium. Alright, this little guy is getting tired. I have to go. Under such circumstances, I won't be saying may the goddess bless you. Sweet dreams. Klein pressed his chest, smiled, and bowed. No, there won't be any sweet dreams tonight. I have to rush back to Backland. This isn't a happy experience, it's like having a relationship with someone you don't like. Daly's voice grew softer, and the translucent face with no eyes or nose slowly shrank back into the wall without leaving behind any traces. The gas lamp light suddenly became bright and the gloominess vanished into thin air. Klein, who had his spirit vision activated the entire time, watched the changes in a daze. It took him a while to snap back to reality. Spirit medium, no, spirit guide is very impressive. It can actually conjure a messenger. I wonder what's the specialty of my sequence 7 and sequence 6, he muttered to himself. Then, he quickly dispelled the spiritual wall, switched off the gas lamp in his bedroom, and silently lay down in the darkness. He didn't plan to head to the world above the gray fog that night, just in case Daly suddenly returned and said Dunsmith's classic words, "Oh yeah, I forgot one thing." When that happens, I wouldn't even be able to silence her with death. On the second day, Klein arrived at the Blackthorn Security Company 3 minutes early. "Good morning, Klein. The new clerk is here." Roseanne greeted with a splendid smile. Klein felt sincerely happy for her. "Congratulations, Roseanne. The goddess heard your prayers. My skin shall be back to perfect condition." Roseanne nodded, her eyes beaming with joy. After they chatted for a while, Klein walked through the partition and knocked on the door to the captain's office. "Please come in." Dunn's mellow voice sounded. Klein pushed open the door to enter. He saw his captain sit up instinctively as his gray eyes turned dark. It was as though he was prepared for trouble. Ahem. Klein cleared his throat, set aside his hat and cane, then sat down. "Captain, I have something that I'd like to report." "What is it?" Dunn asked in a deep voice, his arms crossed. Klein looked at the serious Dunsmith and smiled suddenly. "Captain, I understood something yesterday." "And what is that?" Dunn repeated the question in a serious tone. He leaned back and unfolded his crossed arms. Klein recalled the script that he had prepared. "As I was concluding my past experiences, I realized that the names of sequence potions encompass a whole set of principles that can help us gain control over them, a set of principles that allow us to avoid the negative impacts. When we're doing things according to these set of principles, we seem to become a member of the corresponding job. Similarly, these sets of principles are hidden. They aren't made known to you directly. All we can do is make conclusions from the corresponding job bit by bit, then adjust our understanding based on the different feedback we receive. Thus, when I became a real seer at the Divination Club and obtained my set of principles for the seer, the auditory and visual illusions that plagued me just vanished. That is what I understood." After finishing his narration, Klein heaved a sigh to himself. He said everything he needed to say, other than explicitly mentioning the term acting. Sigh, let's hope that the captain doesn't tell the church that I've already developed such ideas when he is asked. That would place much more attention on me. There's also the factor of the relationship between the seer pathway and the Antigonus family. That might cause trouble eventually. But the captain has also experienced all kinds of situations, and he's an experienced and smart person. Once he understands the acting method, he'll definitely notice that the church is hiding relevant information. He'll know what he should say and what he shouldn't. Klein had many complicated thoughts. But he quickly made a decision and had a plan. If the captain was still unable to understand the acting method or sense of the cover-up by the church, then I'll tell him straight up before submitting the special application. Yes, I'll probe him first and determine what he knows. Dunn listened to Klein's description in silence, his gray eyes becoming even deeper. He was silent for nearly 20 seconds as he rubbed his temples before he picked up his pipe and took a whiff. After sniffing it, he took out a matchbox, seemingly forgetting about the rules of the Nighthawks. The white smoke billowed into the air as Dunn closed his eyes, seemingly appreciating the smell of tobacco. After a while, he opened his eyes and smiled at Klein. "I'm sorry, I forgot that you don't smoke." Smoking is bad for your health, Klein answered in all seriousness. Dunn thought with his pipe in his hand. I seem to have understood something too. No, Captain, you don't understand anything. Just don't loiter in my dreams too often. Klein didn't speak and instead gave a friendly smile. Perhaps it won't be too long before you submit the special application to me. Dunn said to Klein, half-jokingly as he took a deep puff of the mint and tobacco. Can I submit it tomorrow? Klein replied inwardly. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Captain, I have be at old Neil's. Today's mysticism lessons are starting soon. All right. Dunn watched Klein leave, his pipe still in his hand. After closing the door to the captain's office, Klein made his way towards the steps leading to the basement in high spirits. He saw two strangers, a male and a female, when he walked past the clerk's office. The new clerks. Klein's mind wondered before he added inwardly, in another 2 days, definitely within this week, I'll submit my application to Captain. Then I'll pass a series of inspections and become a Sequence 8 clown. Along the silent underground passage, Klein turned to the armory and pushed the guard room door open. What happened to you? Klein had a shock when he saw old Neil. Old Neil looked dispirited, his face was pale. He yawned constantly as he said, I've been a little constipated lately. I tried ritualistic magic that can solve such problems last night. In the end, I didn't sleep well the entire night. I had to head to the bathroom multiple times, and in the end, I nearly fell asleep on the toilet bowl. Well, the problem of constipation has been solved. Klein nearly laughed, seeing that it wasn't a serious problem. But he controlled himself. He asked, Are you feeling better now? At the same time, his concern made him tap his left molar twice. He used his spirit vision to observe the aura of old Neil's health. There are some darkness and impurities in the digestive system's yellow and the kidney's orange colors, but it's nothing too serious and is within an acceptable range. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. I'm fine now. I got some medicine for the diarrhea from Fry. Old Neil yawned like a drug addict. Self-study for today's supernatural lesson. There's only 2 or 3 days left of content anyway. All right, Klein responded politely. I could help you guard the armory and study here. How about you go rest in the break room? Old Neil immediately straightened his back, his eyes glimmering as he answered, Lad, you surely are the kindest nighthawk, second to Fry. I'll hand the armory over to you. He picked up the cushion he had placed on his knees and rushed out of the guard room like a typhoon, leaving Klein the only person there, dazed. The Blackthorn Security Company accepted an extra mission in the morning. The task involved escorting a rich merchant to the harbor for a deal. Leonard and Kenley completed it easily, earning themselves some extra pay, much to the envy of Klein. He went about his day, learning about mysticism, practicing his shooting, and getting tortured by Instructor Gawain, who seemed to have been agitated by something. Huff, huff. Klein gasped for air. He only regained the ability to take a shower and change after quite some time. He continued toiling after leaving Gawain's house. He spent 2 solely on a carriage and investigated the other 10 houses with red chimneys. Klein's expression became very grave when the last house with the red chimney left his field of vision. The house with the red chimney that I saw in my divination isn't in the list of houses with a recent change in tenants. If that's the case, this has just become troublesome. I wonder how much time I would need to investigate about 1,600 houses. Sigh. I can't ask for any help to do something like this. After all, only I would have the sense of familiarity from my spirituality when I see the target. Don't be discouraged, don't give up. I'll continue the investigation whenever I have free time. I'll try to complete it within 3 months, no, 2 months. Who knows, the target might be found in tomorrow's investigation. And, I'll organize the material when I get back and plan a route according to the distance of the sectors. Klein motivated himself, banishing his feelings of depression. Now that he had made a decision, he planned to instruct the driver to turn toward Daffodil Street. However, he suddenly realized that he was somewhere close to where Mr. Azik stayed. Before Mr. Azik went for his holiday, he did write to tell me that he would be back sometime this week, but he didn't specify the exact date. Since it's on the way, I'll leave a note for him. Also, I rented this carriage for an hour with 2 solely, and the time's almost up anyway. I'll just stop at Mr. Azik's house, then take a public carriage back. Klein quickly made a decision. 4 minutes later, he alighted from the carriage and arrived outside Mr. Azik's house. The houses here were obviously of higher quality than those at Daffodil Street, but not as good as those on House Street. There was a patch of grass in front of the house, and a small garden in the back. Ding! 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 Klein pulled on the rope outside the door and sounded the bell within the house. A few moments later, he heard footsteps from inside before the door swung open. Azik's mild facial features and bronze skin appeared before Klein. Since he was at home, he was only dressed in a simple white shirt, a brown vest, and matching pants. Klein? I was just about to write to you, Azik greeted enthusiastically. I just arrived home last night. Klein stared at the small mole near Azik's right ear. Mr. Azik, I found a clue to your past. Really? Azik instantly became excited. The sadness he had in his eyes dulled. Let's talk inside. Klein looked around. Azik quickly nodded. He moved to the side and allowed Klein entry. He locked the door and guided Klein to the living room on the first floor. They sat on the soft sofa. What clues did you find? He asked impatiently. Having not expected to meet Mr. Azik today, Klein organized his words. I received a mission recently and had to deal with a wraith in Lamud town. Lamud. Azik repeated the term softly, his eyebrows creasing. Klein observed his expression and slowed down his tone. In the process of dealing with the wraith, we discovered something and thus conducted an investigation within the town. A resident of the town was in possession of a portrait of the first Baron Lamud which he tried to sell me. I asked to view the portrait out of curiosity and discovered that the person drawn had facial features that resembled yours, other than the hair. He even had the same mole near the ear, similar position, similar size. Under my interrogation, the man told me that the portrait was about 40 years old, but the person in the portrait definitely came from the abandoned castle. It was a replica of the ancient portrait excavated from the castle. You should know that people like us with unique abilities can more or less tell if somebody is lying. This told me that the man wasn't lying. Azik leaned forward as he listened to Klein. He crossed his arms and remained silent for a while. 5 minutes later, he exhaled. Your description didn't make me recall anything. Perhaps I should visit the abandoned castle myself. Can you take me there? That would be my honor, Klein replied. But I have to head home first. I don't want my siblings to worry. No problem. Azik stood up. 2 Daffodil Street. Klein nodded at Azik and briskly walked to the door of his house, fished out his keys, and opened the door. Melissa was already home, so she heard the click of the door lock and quickly came out of the kitchen and into the living room. Upon seeing Klein, she said with eyes beaming with joy, I bought groceries. There's chicken, potatoes, onions, fish, turnips, and peas. I even bought a small jar of honey. Sis, are you also getting used to the occasional luxury? Klein chuckled. You'll have to prepare dinner tonight. Count me out for I'll be out of town. I might not return until dawn. Yeah, I'm doing a favor for Mr. Azik, a teacher from the Koei University's Department of History. As he spoke, he turned sideways and pointed at the carriage that was waiting outside. Melissa's lips opened and closed twice, before she pursed them and said, all right. Klein bade his sister farewell and left. He got into the rented carriage that Azik had hired and traveled 2 hours and 40 minutes to Lamud town. It was almost 9 at that point. The sky was dark, and they could only rely on the crimson moonlight and the twinkling starlight that penetrated the clouds to illuminate the areas without street lamps. After he instructed the driver to wait in town, Klein led Azik towards the ancient abandoned castle. As they walked, he realized that Azik was walking faster, to the point of him having to break out into a small jog to keep up. In the end, it was Azik who led the way. Klein wanted to say something initially, but cleverly swallowed his words when he saw Azik's solemn expression and tightly pursed lips. With such speed, they quickly arrived at the ancient castle. The castle, which was almost a wreckage, extended itself in all four directions while its spire looked desolate, wild, eerie, and dark. Azik looked at the ancient castle and slowed down his footsteps. He stopped there and his gaze looked profound but lost, as though he was hovering between dreams and reality. Suddenly, he groaned in pain, lifting his hand to pinch his forehead while his muscles looked distorted with agony. "Mr. Azik, are you okay?" Klein asked carefully as he activated his spirit vision. When they were on board the hired carriage, making their way from Daffodil Street to Lamed Town, he had done a quick divination by flipping a coin to see if there would be any danger on their trip. But he believed that divination wasn't all-powerful, and he kept his guard up to prevent any misinterpretation on his part. Plus, Azik was quite mysterious. No one knew about his past, and it was uncertain how he would respond if he were to be stimulated by an encounter with his past. Caution and worry had accompanied Klein throughout the trip. Azik didn't reply immediately but took another 2 steps forward with a pained expression. He relaxed the hand that was holding his forehead. He then pointed forward with a dreamy tone. "I've seen this ancient castle before in my dream. Back then, it was still complete with a robust outer wall and a high spire. I remember that there was a stable there, a water well there, and a barracks there. Over there was a garden that was used to plant potatoes and sweet potatoes. I remember there was a training field. My child, he was a boy. He was only about 7 or 8 years old, but he enjoyed running around while dragging a broadsword that was taller than him. He said that he wanted to become a knight when he grows up. My wife always complained about it being too gloomy in the castle. She liked the sunlight, the warmth." Klein looked at the color of his energy field, and what the man said made his scalp tingle. He was also slightly touched, as though he was experiencing a paranormal story himself. The ancient castle is really related to Mr. Azik. Could he really be the first-generation Baron Lamed, a transcendental creature that has lived for 1400 years? Is he a human or an evil spirit? No way, there are no such things as evil spirits running around under broad daylight and getting involved with the Nighthawks. Klein couldn't help with his thoughts and allowed them to clash against each other to ignite more ideas. Just then, Azik stopped muttering and took huge strides through the main gate. He walked all the way into the castle without Klein's guidance. He found the hidden gear with obvious familiarity and opened the secret door to enter the basement. Gripping his cane tightly, Klein followed behind Azik. They walked down along the stairs and returned to the place where there was a coffin. Unlike the previous time, the coffin was closed and the warm and pure feeling was gone. "The coffin is closed. It must have been Fry. It's his work ethic as a corpse collector." Klein nodded thoughtfully and watched the conflicted Azik walk in front of the coffin with his spirit vision. Azik extended his hands to push the coffin lid until there was a gap. He gazed at the skeleton without a skull for a long time, and he suddenly wailed in pain and sorrow. Azik lurched backwards with heavy footsteps. He staggered and fell against the wall before Klein managed to respond. He covered his face with his hands and sat there dispirited. The surroundings suddenly became even darker. Klein quickened his pace and extended his hands, but he retracted them again, not daring to disturb the man. Just then, his spiritual perception told him that the current Mr. Azik was very scary, so scary that the basement grew gloomy and terrifying. Klein slowly moved closer to the stairs. He trusted Mr. Azik's character, but he was afraid that the man would lose control. In such an uneasy situation, he waited for a few more minutes. Then, he finally saw Azik lower his hands and stand up slowly. "Mr. Azik seems to have changed. This is what my spiritual perception tell me. But in my spirit vision, his aura colors don't have any obvious changes. His emotions are in low spirits, depressed and pained as before." Klein made a quick judgment and felt that Azik had become gloomier and more imposing. "I recalled something, but it's very minor." Azik spoke with an emotionless tone. Then, he looked around and said, I sense the power that made your fate disharmonious. Huh? Klein was stunned. Pleasantly surprised, he asked in reply, can you trace the source? The person behind the scene who stayed in the Red Chimney house created coincidences in secret and came to Lamad's ancient castle to take away the black armored knight's head? What is he trying to do? What is his true intention? It's been too long, but I'd like to try. There seemed to be a volcano that was close to erupting within Azik's deep voice. How? Klein asked curiously. Azik walked before the coffin and gazed upon the skeleton inside it. He took my child's skull. I want to find him through a blood connection. Your child? Mr. Azik, are you sure the black armored knight is your child? So you really are an antique. You really lost your memory after such a long time? This is the price you have to pay in order to obtain such longevity? Klein took a silent breath, feeling the odd sensation of interacting with a legendary creature. Then, Azik extended his right hand and suddenly cut his index finger with his thumbnail. A drop of fresh red blood accurately dripped onto the white skeleton. It quickly seeped into the skeleton, and the entire skeleton suddenly turned blood red. Wah! 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 Klein suddenly heard the sound of a baby crying and felt that there was someone staring at him from behind. He drew his revolver and pointed behind him before turning around slowly. However, there was nothing in sight. Nothing existed behind him. Even the stairway that connected to the ground floor was gone. Wah! Wah! The sound of a baby crying drilled into Klein's ears, and when he looked towards the coffin again, he was shocked to see that there were many shapeless and distorted faces rising amidst billowing black fog. Then, they manifested a strange door. Creak! The illusory door opened and palish white arms extended out, one after another, but they vanished into the black fog before Azik. Through the crack that the door opened, Klein saw a white skull. It was thrown underneath a brown tree and reduced to powder as a result of the elements. Creak! Countless palish white arms were sliced off by the door that suddenly slammed shut as they fell onto the ground. Then, Klein heard a long sigh, Mr. Azik's heavy sigh, a sigh that seemed to have a rich history behind it. Along with the sigh, the black fog dispersed and the sound of a baby crying ceased. Everything returned to its original state, except for the accentuated chill. Klein clenched his chattering teeth and looked into the coffin. He saw that the red skeleton had returned to its original, crystal-clear white. I'm sorry. I couldn't find him. Azik said in a deep voice, his back to Klein. At the same time, he closed the coffin. It's not surprising that we couldn't find him. It would have been a surprise if we could, Klein comforted him. Anyway, I've been disappointed many times regarding this matter, he added in his head. Azik took another glance at the coffin before him. He turned around slowly and said, I'll continue investigating and I hope that I can have your assistance. No problem. This is exactly what I wanted to do. Klein held back his urge to tell Azik about the red chimney. Because it was useless to bring it up. He could only rely on himself to confirm his target. However, that solved one of his major problems, which was how he should involve the Nighthawks after he found the red chimney house. He didn't believe that he could take out such a mysterious and scary puppet master alone. Now, he could ask for Mr. Azik's help. Azik widened his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. All he did was sigh and walk towards the stairway quietly. After leaving the basement and closing the secret door, the two of them walked along the road covered with weeds and brambles. Neither one of them spoke as they walked back from the abandoned ancient castle. In the dark night, Azik suddenly said, Until this matter is resolved, I will quit my job and leave Tingen, to look for my lost past. Mr. Azik, did you find out what happened to you? Klein asked, having failed to hide his curiosity. The chirping of insects and the hooting of owls reverberated along the path back to the small town. Azik looked ahead and said after a few seconds of silence, Even though I'm not entirely sure what happened to me, I do have a rough idea. Perhaps I'm someone who has lived for a very, very long time. Mr. Azik, you have to seriously consider if you still fit the definition of someone. Klein thought to himself, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. This wilderness, this silence, often makes one weak. I should have paid some sort of price in exchange for this long life. I've lived since the end of the fourth epoch, like a wandering spirit across the continent. Azik's voice deepened, as if he was trying to suppress his emotions. I don't remember the past. I've forgotten about the people and things that I've sworn to remember. Klein poked at the weeds in front of him and said, in thought, Mr. Azik, I have a theory regarding your situation. What theory? Azik looked to the side. I think that there's a cycle to your memory loss. Perhaps you die once every few decades, and your memories of the events before that vanishes. Then, after some time, you wake up from the darkness of your slumber and begin on a new phase of life. This way, we can explain why you would have such varied dreams. Those are events that you came across over your several lives, Klein described his theory. Azik slowed down his pace, as if the darkness had grabbed onto his sleeve. He looked ahead with a turbid look before saying after a while, that is consistent with the memories that were jolted awake just now. Memories that were jolted awake? Klein had an idea as he said immediately, Mr. Azik, you might not have to leave Tingen to search for your lost past. You'll regain your memory slowly. Why? Azik turned his head in surprise. Klein smiled and said, your memories aren't completely gone. The parts of your memory that jolted awake just now are proof of that. Furthermore, do you remember the moment you woke up in Backland and discovered that you had forgotten all about the past? Azik nodded. That's a nightmare that bothers me till this day. Klein tapped downwards with his black cane and explained in detail, before today, I didn't think that there was a problem with that. But your description just now, together with my own conjecture, makes it feel a little weird. You had a document of identification and enough money when you woke up from your dream. You also appeared in a way that didn't startle anyone. All of that seems like it was arranged for you, allowing you to fit into society with little effort. Then, who made the arrangements? There is only one answer, the you from the past. The past you regained his memories and knew that you would have to usher in a new life. Thus, he prepared everything for you, trying his best to not let you attract suspicion from anyone else. Azik stopped walking. He looked at the specks of light coming from the town, once again slipped into silence. Perhaps the parents that I've been searching for were the past me all along. He sighed, admitting that Klein's deduction was very plausible. Thus, you don't need to do anything. All you have to do is patiently wait for your memories to come back to you, Klein concluded and consoled Mr. Azik. Azik subconsciously waved his cane before he turned still, like a sculpture carved out of marble. After a long time, he looked into the distance and answered, perhaps I'll only fully regain my memory when this life is nearing its end. I don't want to wait that long. I want to have plenty of time to understand and free myself from this destiny. So I have to be more proactive in searching for my past, to trigger my memories a little at a time. I have to get back my memories back before the time you hypothesized. Waiting would only make me repeat the cycle. Indeed, that's the choice worth looking forward to the most. Klein didn't advise against it. Instead, he asked, Mr. Azik, may I ask for your help in something trivial, other than finding the criminal that took the skull of your child and made my fate disharmonious? Azik nodded slightly. What do you need me to do? Klein organized his words and said, I hope that you can head to a town between 2 and 5 hours away from Tingen by carriage next week, or the week after. I need you to cause a paranormal incident, something that wouldn't harm anyone. Judging from how you tried to search for the criminal using your bloodline's connection, I would think that you are fairly adept in the field of dead souls. No problem, Azik promised without any hesitation. He didn't ask Klein why he wanted him to do something like that. At the same time, he had tacitly confirmed Klein's conjecture about his powers. Thank you. This is very important to me. Also, you can only choose a follower of the Evernight goddess when you are picking a target. Also, don't leave any clues behind, Klein instructed. Only through this method could the incident be relayed to the Tingen Nighthawks. Only then could he join the team on the mission and suggest using sealed artifact 3-0782. Only then could he extract the divine blood from the sealed artifact to create flaring sun charms. That was the most powerful item he could obtain at the moment. Under the assumption that the culprit living in the house with the red chimney hasn't left Tingen, and that Klein was going to continue investigating, he had to try his best to become more powerful. Yes, according to the information I obtained, stealing a little of its powers wouldn't damage 3-0782. At the very most, it would only lessen the amount of time it takes to purify. This is for the safety and stability of Tingen City. Klein inwardly tried to justify his actions. Azik didn't care about his motives. He nodded. I will tell you the name of the town and the estimated time beforehand so you can prepare yourself. Phew. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that this trip to Lamed town wasn't a wasted trip. Even though they only managed to peel back the outermost layer of the mysteries surrounding Mr. Azik and had much more to find out, he had at least managed to gain the friendship of Azik, a reliable ally in his search for the culprit behind the scenes. At 11:30 that night, Klein returned to 2 Daffodil Street, hungry and tired. To think that Mr. Azik didn't treat me to dinner. Sigh. He wouldn't have been in the mood to enjoy dinner anyway, Klein muttered as he opened the door. The house wasn't as dark as he had anticipated. An elegant gas lamp was silently emitting its light, warmly illuminating the living room. Benson was sitting alone on the sofa with a book, draped under a bright coat. When he saw the door open, Benson was just about to speak when he yawned. He had no choice but to cover his mouth. Klein closed the door and smiled, quipping, I went to Lamed town with Mr. Azik. There's an abandoned castle with a long history over there. Benson was immediately enlightened as he laughed. A moonless night, a castle abandoned for a millennia, a cold and creepy environment, coupled with a two-man archaeological team. This is the perfect recipe for the opening of a paranormal novel. What happened today could be classified as paranormal. Klein suddenly recalled the strange door Mr. Azik conjured and the cries of a baby. He said, a lingering fear still gripping onto him, it did feel a bit like that back there. Benson yawned again before shutting his book and said, I need sleep. Ever since I began studying and reading classical literature, the quality of my sleep has become especially good. Klein laughed to himself, suddenly recalling something Miss Justice had mentioned. He said, lowering his voice, Benson, you know that my company has connections with the Awa County Police. I recently heard news from Backland that the King, Prime Minister, other ministers, and members of Parliament are all sick of an inefficient government. They want to push for a reform and select talents to take on positions in the government based on an open examination, just like the entrance examinations of universities. Benson was at a loss at first, then his eyes sparkled as he asked, an open examination? Yes. As long as you pass the examination, you could become a civil servant in one of the branches of the government. My guess is that the contents of the examination will be modeled after the entrance exams of the universities, literature, the classics, math and logic, as well as a basic understanding of the law. Klein used this opportunity to include his opinion. He continued, Benson, this must be kept confidential, and don't put too much hope on this. No one knows if this will be passed by the House of Lords and House of Commons or not. I'll keep it in mind. I understand that all I need to do is study hard. Benson smiled, then said, I'd study hard whether this change happens or not. I'll try my best to free myself from my current circumstance and find a better job. Learning, that's the greatest difference between a human and a curly-haired baboon. No, research suggests that baboons have decent IQ levels, and a certain level of learning abilities. Klein lampooned silently and looked on as Benson headed to the second floor. After that, he smiled and rubbed his stomach as he walked toward the kitchen. He found the leftovers and the chicken Benson and Melissa left him especially. Klein relaxed as he started preparing his late dinner. It was deep into the night now, and most people had already gone to bed. He was the only one still awake, breathing in the cool air with mixed aromas and making slight movements. Everything was peaceful and serene. After he was satiated, he washed the dishes and took a bath. Finally, Klein returned to his room and locked the door. He yawned but kept himself awake. He took out the silver dagger used for rituals and sealed the room with a wall of spirituality. He wanted to divine above the gray fog whether summoning the fool that doesn't belong to this era was dangerous or not. The gray fog filled the air in its eternally unchanging manner as the illusory crimson stars hung around him at varying distances. Klein sat inside the lofty palace that looked like the home of a giant as he looked at the familiar sight before him. After a few seconds, he looked away and made a yellowish-brown goatskin appear before him. Then, he lifted a pen to write his amended incantation for the summoning ritual. Light a candle to represent myself. Use a spiritual wall to create a holy environment. Drip a drop of full moon essence oil in the flame, chamomile pure dew, slumber flower powder, and other ingredients. Note, there's no need to be too particular in this step because it's summoning oneself. Recite the incantation below. I. In ancient Hermes, Jotun, Dragonese, or Elfish. It must be a deep shout. I summon in my name, Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. After scrutinizing it 3 times, Klein wrote a divination statement at the bottom. There will be danger if the ritual above is carried out outside of this world. Phew. He let out a breath, put down the pen, took out the silver chain in his sleeve, and held it with his left hand. The topaz pendant hung above the goatskin steadily, only a slight distance above the divination statement. He reined in his thoughts and entered a cogitation state. There will be danger if the ritual above is carried out outside of this world. There will be danger if the ritual above is carried out outside of this world. After reciting the statement 7 times, Klein opened his eyes, which were almost all black, and looked at the topaz pendant, which was spinning counterclockwise. That meant a negative outcome. There would be no danger. I can give it a try then. Klein made the items before him disappear. He then extended his spirituality to wrap around himself and simulated the sensation of falling. When he returned to his bedroom, due to the fact that he had sealed the entire room with a spiritual wall, Klein immediately cleared his desk and put out a mint-scented candle right in the middle. He pressed slightly on the candle wick, rubbing it with spirituality to cause friction and ignite the candle. Under the flickering dim light, Klein dripped the corresponding essential oils, extracts, and herb powder onto the flame. A soothing fragrance suddenly filled the air, and the room alternated between brightness and darkness. Taking 2 steps back, Klein looked at the candle that represented himself and shouted in Jotun, I. Then, he switched to Hermes, I summon in my name. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Just as he finished speaking, he sensed the wavering candlelight suddenly dance vigorously and produce a vortex with the surrounding fragrance. It absorbed his spirituality at an insane rate. Slumber flower, a herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Klein endured the discomfort brought about from having his spirituality drained as he finished reciting the incantation. Then, he saw the candlelight stop wavering. It was tainted with a gray luster, which extended to about the size of a palm. I didn't summon anything. Oh right, perhaps I'll need to respond to it above the gray fog? It's really quite troublesome to summon myself. Klein muttered, pinching his aching forehead. He calmed himself down, then took 4 steps counterclockwise before arriving above the gray fog again. He saw that there was a rippling light above the seat of honor at the ancient table. It stemmed from the strange symbol at the back of the corresponding chair. The strange symbol that was made up of a pupil-less eye, a symbol representing secrecy, and contorted lines that represented change. All Klein did was extend his hand to reach for it when he immediately heard, I summon in my name, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Then, he saw surging spirituality combined with a rippling light that formed into an illusory yet shapeless door. The door shook as though it wanted to be opened. Klein immediately felt inspired and strongly willed for it to be pushed open. Almost instantly, the boundless fog and lofty palace was drawn forward. There were a few barely noticeable ripples. The ripples surged towards the illusory yet shapeless door. But, no matter how much Klein pushed it, the door couldn't be pushed open. Every movement resulted in dead silence. The door of summoning has yet to take shape? Klein reined in his will and creased his eyebrows when he analyzed the reason why he had failed. He had casually named the door of summoning. I'm lacking spirituality, so I can't form a complete door of summoning. When I advance to sequence 8 clown and pass through the initial dangerous stage, I can give it another try. Maybe it won't be a problem by then. Klein nodded lightly and roughly understood what had happened. This experiment gave him a confidence boost. He felt heartened as this was the first time that he received some sort of response from the mysterious space above the gray fog, other than the incident where he divined about eternal blazing sun. There will come a day when I'll understand all the secrets here, Klein excitedly declared in his heart. He then made a rapid descent into the boundless fog after he wrapped himself up with spirituality. Klein quickly blew out the candle after he returned to his bedroom. He ended the ritual and cleaned up his study desk before he removed the spiritual wall. A gust of wind suddenly blew as he yawned. He collapsed into the bed, covered himself with a blanket and quickly fell asleep. In the hazy dream that followed, Klein woke up abruptly and realized that he was sitting in the living room of his home and was holding the Tinjin City Honest paper. Don't tell me Captain is here again? He was stunned at first as he looked outside the oriel window, finding humor in his exasperation. With a creak, the door opened. Dunn walked in slowly, wearing his black windbreaker that went beyond his knees and held a cane and pipe. He was still wearing his black top hat, and underneath it were his profound gray eyes. Dunn came to the living room and sat on the single-seat sofa. He leisurely crossed his right leg over his left. He put aside his cane, took off his hat, and leaned backwards. He sat there quietly and looked at Klein as though he was thinking. Captain, what are you trying to do today? Klein was dumbfounded. In order to not expose that he knew that it was a dream, he pretended to not be affected by it and continued to read the newspaper. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. He lifted his head to look at Dunn, who sat opposite him. He found out that the captain was still sitting there quietly and was looking at him in deep thought. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Klein flipped through the newspaper back and forth multiple times, looking at Dunn from the corner of his eyes, and noticed that the man was still looking at him quietly in deep thought. Captain, you're making me very uncomfortable. Klein couldn't sit in peace. He folded the newspaper and put it aside. He nodded and smiled at Dunn. Then, he went to the kitchen to get a piece of cloth and started wiping the dining table and coffee table. Captain, look, my dream is so simple, so ordinary, so boring. There's nothing worth observing. Hurry up and leave. Why don't you pretend to be a ghost and I'll pretend to be frightened, then you can complete your achievement as a nightmare. He prayed in silence and lifted his head, but all he saw was Dunn's deep gray eyes that were still in deep thought. Under such a quiet and constant gaze, Klein wiped all the furniture and cleaned his room. He was so exhausted in his dream. What wore him out the most was Dunn Smith, who was watching him quietly in deep thought. Klein had no idea how much time had passed while he made himself busy until he finally saw his captain uncross his legs and stand up. Then, he took his cane, put on his hat, and walked through the door. Klein held his breath and watched Dunn leave his house. He couldn't help but lift his right hand to wave goodbye. Phew. When everything returned to normal, Klein let out a breath of relief. That really was such a nightmare. He thought to himself, too preoccupied for tears. Backlund, West Backlund, Phillips Department Store. Phillips was one of the top-end department stores in the Lone Kingdom. It only opened to nobles and wealthy people who were qualified to be members. There was always luxurious carriages parked outside with different emblems printed on them. Not only was it a safe place for shopping, it also became a popular social venue due to the strict restriction on members. Audrey brought her maidservant, Annie, and her golden retriever, Susie. Under the ushering of an eagerly attentive attendant, She got off the carriage and walked through the entrance. Along the way, she saw daughters of viscounts, countesses, or maidens with parents of high social status. She maintained her elegance and greeted them all gracefully. She communicated with different nobles on different topics. For instance, when she faced a particular countess, she would compliment the fittings of the countess's dress, and when she greeted a particular baroness, she would praise the outstanding performance of the baroness's husband in the House of Lords. Audrey hadn't been good at that previously, she was too stubborn and too arrogant. But now, she didn't even need to put in much effort to respond perfectly. In a spectator's eyes, most of the emotions and thoughts of the female nobles were written on their faces. Arriving at the second floor, Audrey turned into a shop that sold ready-made dresses. The attendant in the shop was a petite maiden. She wore a black and white dress and had shoulder-length blonde hair. She was the arbiter, Xianxia. Audrey gave Susie a look without changing her facial expression. The dog understood what her owner meant immediately and ran to another counter. Maidservant Annie went after Susie to try to drag her back. "Well done." Audrey complimented inwardly and walked next to Xianxia, pretending to look at the variety of dresses. "Why did you arrange to meet me here for?" Zio inquired with a whisper while she loudly introduced the dresses. Her voice was tender, just like a child's. "Where's the original attendant?" Audrey asked in reply instead of answering her. Zio looked around and said, "I convinced her." She was happy to rest for the morning. Audrey looked at the different styled dresses while she took out a piece of neatly folded paper from her lamb leather handbag and secretly passed it to Zio. "Rear Admiral Hurricane, Kalangos, has snuck into Backland. This is his portrait. I hope you can find him for me. Oh, and don't alert him." Zio received the piece of paper and unfolded it to take a quick glance. She saw that it was a lifelike portrait of a man in his 30s that had a unique broad chin. "I was once constantly praised by my art teacher." Audrey stole a glance at Zio and lifted her head. She added, "The kingdom offers a reward of 10,000 pounds for Kalangos. If he were to be arrested, even the person that only provided clues would definitely be awarded with a few £100. Just as she finished her sentence, she saw Zio's eyes beam with joy, as she had expected. 153 Final act of laying the foundation plus, turn off reset. A unique wide jaw, his hair is in a bun like an ancient knight's, eyes that look at you with the intent of an icy smile. Xianxia was half slumped on the sofa as she scrutinized the portrait that Audrey had handed to her. In her eyes, the man might as well have been a living, walking pile of money. After committing the looks of the great pirate Kalangos to her memory, she proceeded to read the description written at the bottom of the page. Brown hair, dark green eyes. The portrait can only be used as a general reference as the target possesses the ability to transform into another person. It is unknown how long he can maintain the transformation. The portrait can only be used as a reference. The target possesses the ability to transform into another person. Only as a reference, transform into another person. Then why did I spend so much time memorizing his facial features? Zio wore a dazed look, as if it was the first time she had witnessed the evil intentions the world had for her. She looked up and saw Fur's Wall slumped languidly in a sofa across from her. She seemed to be muttering to herself, "There's no way to look for this person. We don't know what he looks like. All we know is that he's not from Backland. There are far too many foreigners who come into Backland every day." Furs attempted to sit up, but failed even after 3 tries. "I'm only an apprentice, not an arbiter." She pouted as she placed her hand on the armrest of the sofa, successfully pulling herself up into a sitting position. "Does that lady think that we are prophets?" Furs jested. Zio was about to answer when she realized that there were still footnotes she hadn't gone through yet. She recited them out softly. The suggested ways of searching are as follows. 1. Kalangos has an evil object with him. It needs to devour the flesh, blood, and soul of a living person every other day. You can consider looking for missing vagrants. 2. Search for Kalangos' information thoroughly and build a profile of his unique hobbies and behaviors. 3. A person's facial features might change, but as long as he hasn't received any special training, he will often act like himself, such as the things he prefers to eat, his gait, actions he's used to performing, and many other details. Furs nodded as she listened. Miss Audrey isn't the innocent, naive teen that the rumors about her suggest. She has a meticulous heart and a calm sense of observation. Is that so? Xiao asked, doubtful. She didn't expect an answer as she changed the topic by suggesting, I'll be in charge of gathering the information. Can you consolidate that pile of gold pounds? No, that admiral's hobbies and unique traits? Furs opened her eyes wide open and shook the steel box containing her cigarettes. How can you bear to do this? How can you bear to make a dainty, sensitive author do consolidation, analysis, and deduction? Xiao shot her good friend a glance as she exuded an air of authority without realizing it. There's an interesting paragraph on deduction in your Stormwind Mountain villa. Furs pulled her shoulders back and lowered her head. She looked at the coffee table as she said, do you know how much of my hair I pulled out, how much sleep I lost, just for that paragraph? She quickly lifted her head and looked at Xiao Dari Cha, then lowered her head once again and grumbled, life is short. There are too many things that we need to do, why must we waste our time on such uninteresting, menial tasks? That's very reasonable. Xiao nearly nodded in agreement. She fought hard to keep her authority as an arbiter. Then do you have any other ways to solve this problem? She suppressed her voice, making her childlike voice sound deeper. Furs thought for nearly 20 seconds before looking up suddenly. We can hire a professional. After you finish collecting information on Rear Admiral Hurricane, we shall erase the name and hand it over to an excellent detective, then ask him to do the consolidation and deduction. All we have to do is pay a fee. Why didn't I think of that? Xiao's mind went blank. Furs and Xiao looked at each other without saying anything. When the atmosphere became awkward, she cleared her throat. We'll do it according to your suggestion. After saying this, she quickly added, you'll pay the fee. House Street, Divination Club. Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti. The pretty receptionist Angelica looked at Klein in surprise. You rarely come on Fridays. Exhausted from searching for the house with the red chimney, Klein smiled and said. Fate never repeats itself indefinitely. It always brings us some surprises. He was in the area, and the time had expired on the carriage he rented, thus, he came for a cup of black tea and some rest. Furthermore, this would serve as the final layer of the foundations. With the new experience at the Divination Club, he would logically mention the application to Dunn Smith. Your words are always so philosophical, Angelica praised. Klein thought for a moment before saying with deliberation, I might not come to the Divination Club too often in the future, so you need not recommend me to others anymore. He had already digested his potion, so he had to advance towards a new goal. Why? Angelica said in shock and puzzlement. You've already made a name for yourself in the club. Most people know that your divinations are very accurate and miraculous. In fact, we were considering getting you to come in on Sundays as a lecturer. If I was paid £1 for every divination I perform, then I would keep doing this regardless of how tired I was. Besides, I still have to investigate the houses with red chimneys and find the culprit as soon as possible. Klein smiled warmly. Madam, do not convince me to stay, this is the arrangement of fate. I won't stop coming to the Divination Club entirely, it's just that my visits will become less frequent. I'll still pay the membership fees on time. I can get reimbursed for it anyway. I will come down occasionally to monitor the place. Klein added in his heart. How regretful. I hope that you will be at the club when I happen to be lost. Angelica sighed. She realized that this wasn't as surprising as she imagined after the initial shock had passed. Perhaps such a miraculous seer that still respected fate wasn't someone who could be held back by a club in Tingen. Angelica smiled, as if thinking about something. Side black tea? Yes. Klein returned a smile. He spent about 20 minutes in the club, spending the time resting, finishing his black tea before leaving the club. He took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. When he entered, he opened the mailbox out of habit and saw that there was a letter placed inside not too long ago. Klein opened the letter and noticed that it was from Mr. Azik. I will be heading to Morristown on Sunday and return on Wednesday. Most of the citizens in Morristown are believers of the goddess. He's heading there on a Sunday, which means that according to the usual level of efficiency, the Nighthawks would only receive the information on Tuesday or Wednesday. I can make it. To think that Mr. Azik would remember my request. I hope that he remembers not to do it personally. Him summoning a spirit and doing something scary would suffice. Klein nodded slightly. He released his spirituality and burned the letter with friction. He flicked his hand, turning the flames into ashes, and allowed them to fall slowly onto the ground. Saturday afternoon. Klein was wearing his black windbreaker and hat. He had his cane in his hand as he walked slowly into the Blackthorn Security Company. After greeting Roseanne, he looked at the partition and noticed that the captain's office was open. He deliberately spoke louder. Yesterday, I saw a girl who looked just like you at the divination club. Really? Roseanne asked, her interest piqued. Klein nodded without sincerity. Yes, in fact, I thought that she was your sister. I'm sorry to have to disappoint you, but I have no sisters, not even cousins. Roseanne laughed. Do you remember her name? No, why would I remember her name? Klein smiled. Looking at her was exactly like looking at you. Can I take that as a compliment? Roseanne was a chatty girl who never needed others to start the conversation. She asked on her own accord, Klein, I would assume that you're earning quite a bit from the divination club? As a true seer, your abilities are far beyond those who take this as a hobby. We would still be good colleagues if you didn't mention this. Klein coughed. A seer has to be respectful of fate. We cannot use divination to ask for abnormal privileges. Are you concluding your own maxim for a seer? Roseanne asked out of curiosity. Yes, Klein answered frankly. After a brief chat, Klein said goodbye to Roseanne. He took his hat and walked toward the partition. Knock. 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 He looked at Dunn Smith, who was drinking his coffee, as he knocked on the open door. Please come in. Dunn looked up at Klein and adjusted his posture immediately. Klein had already probed the captain over the past 2 days. He confirmed that Dunn Smith hadn't mentioned the acting method as he was trying it out. It was clear that he was also cautious of the higher-ups of the church. Thus he closed the door and sat across from Dunn. He said with a serious, yet slightly excited expression, Captain, I believe that I have completely grasped the seer potion. I wish to submit a special application. As he looked into Klein's eyes, Dunn took a deep breath and leaned back. Then, he slowly exhaled as he spoke. Are you certain? There were minor changes in his facial expression. He seemed to be well prepared for the special application, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon. Captain, why do you look relieved? Klein didn't conceal his smile as he said, I'm certain, Captain. When you fully master a potion, you'll feel a very special and magical sensation. You'll have no doubt that you've fully mastered the potion. Special, magical feeling. Dunn muttered those words softly and his eyebrows slowly knitted together. The captain advanced twice without fully digesting the potion? Of course, if he didn't know about the acting method, it would be difficult to fully digest it. He must have used a prolonged period of time to break it down and was subconsciously acting to minimize the risk of losing control. Poor captain. Klein quietly looked at Dunn Smith, but he didn't speak or say anything further so as to allow Dunn to think carefully. After almost a minute, Dunn's deep eyes reflected Klein's figure once again. He weighed his words before he said, maybe it would be a better option to wait another year. What the captain means is that waiting another year would make it less conspicuous. With the example that Madame Daly set for me, the higher-ups wouldn't pay too much attention to me. At most, I would only be put on a list for observation, Klein thought and answered frankly, at first, I wanted to wait until next year to send in my special application. After all, there are too many things that I need to master. For instance, my combat arts is only at the beginner level. But, Captain, don't you think that we've experienced too many coincidences in the last 2 months? We were chasing after the kidnappers when we came across the Antigonus notebook in the opposite room. The shipment of sealed artifact 2-049 was delayed, but Ray Bieber didn't leave Tingen and tried to digest the power at the harbor. I went to attend a birthday banquet and triggered Hannes Vincent's incident. I went to investigate at the library and ran into a member of the Aurora Order. I don't know what these coincidences mean, but I feel insecure. That's why I want to enhance myself in the best possible way. Klein seized the opportunity to talk about the manipulator behind the scenes. It was something he had planned to include in his schedule. Without exposing his uniqueness, he would remind the Nighthawks to make them search for more clues from different angles. What he said earlier would only lead the other Nighthawks to conclude that Klein had a discerning mind and was good at organizing his thoughts. The moment Klein said the word "but," Dunn's body leaned forward. In the end, he steepled his fingers in front of his mouth. He fixed his gaze and remained quiet, seemingly thinking about what Klein had said. After a while, Dunn lifted his head and said in a mellow and deep voice, very perceptive. Perhaps there really is something lurking in the dark. Without waiting for Klein to speak, he instructed, "You can submit the special application." "All right." Klein lifted the corner of his lips when he answered. He got up with a smile and walked towards the door. As expected, he heard a familiar additional remark. "Hold on," Dunn called out. He weighed his words and said, "Take note of your choice of words." "Don't worry, Captain. I place a far greater importance on this matter than you do." Klein nodded in agreement with a smile. At first, he thought Dunn would propose that they avoid going through the Holy Cathedral and instead advance to Sequence 8 in secret. Then they could go through the normal procedure after 3 years. However, after he thought it through, he realized that it was impossible. Regardless of whether it was through a special application or a normal application, the person who was going to advance still had to be investigated by the Holy Cathedral. The only difference was that one method was relatively simple and the other was more complicated. If he had become a Sequence 8 in secret, then it could put the entire Tingen Nighthawks in trouble. Since Klein was finished with his mysticism lessons, he didn't go to the basement in a hurry but walked to the clerk's office next door after leaving the captain's office. He found a man and a woman sitting in the office. The man was in his 30s and the woman was in her 20s, they were the 2 newly added members. They were surprised when Klein entered, then they smiled and nodded in greeting. They were curious and in awe of the Beyonders that they worked with. Klein didn't chat with them but found an empty desk and began writing a draft for the special application. As he already had a draft in his head, it only took about 10 minutes to complete his initial work. After reading it a couple of times and amending parts of it, he sat before the Ackerson Model 1346 typewriter and started typing his draft onto a document. Listening to the tapping of the keyboard, the 2 new clerks exchanged looks and stood up simultaneously. They left the office and went to the reception hall to chat with Roseanne, allowing Klein to have some privacy. Very careful and fully aware of the need to maintain secrecy. Klein stole a glance at their receding figures as he complimented them. He focused on his work again and continued tapping on the typewriter. Just as he was going to complete his special application, Leonard Mitchell came out of the restroom. He looked around while he buttoned his shirt. There was an unrestrained beauty in his messy hair. "What's the report you're writing?" Leonard looked around the clerk's office as he leaned against the door frame with his right foot tiptoed to balance himself and his hands tucked into his pockets. His green eyes examined Klein with interest. Klein typed the last word and the last punctuation mark. He then turned his head and smiled. "Special application." "Special application?" Leonard asked, puzzled. Klein picked up the paper and skimmed through it quickly. He casually explained, "A special application to advance to Sequence 8. Cough. 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 Leonard suddenly coughed vigorously. He calmed down and asked, "You're already done digesting the potion?" "Digest? Bro, you know quite a bit." Klein held his special application and walked before Leonard. He lifted an eyebrow and said, yes. Then, he looked into his eyes and added softly with a chuckle, I remember someone told me once that there are some people who are special, people who can do things that others can't. Such as me. Such as you. Leonard was suddenly at a loss for words. He could only change his standing posture and take his hands out his pockets to cross them in front of his chest. He opened his mouth and finally organized his words. He asked in a low voice, don't you think that it's too risky? As he already knew about digesting, he definitely understands that my advancement has no risk of losing control. Is he referring to the attention from the higher-ups in the church? Klein explained while in thought, Leonard, do you remember the first task that we worked on together? We were merely tracking kidnappers, but we realized that the room opposite had clues about the Antigonus family's notebook. He repeated what he mentioned to Dunn once more. Leonard's expression grew heavy, and he nodded in agreement slightly. He muttered to himself and said, maybe, I have to hurry up. Just as he finished, he suddenly looked at Klein and flashed a smile as he said, aren't you going to share your experience with us? The experience to quickly grasp a potion and avoid the risk of losing control. This guy sure can put on a facade quickly. Klein smiled and answered, I'm more than willing to. He was planning to seize the opportunity today to remind his Nighthawk teammates on how to minimize the risk of losing control. Of course, to maintain his personal safety, he couldn't say it as straightforwardly as he did to Dunn Smith. At most, he could describe the idea vaguely, in a way that wouldn't alert anyone who was sent down by the higher-ups. Let's do it now then. Leonard impatiently dragged Klein to the Nighthawk's recreation room. At that very moment, other than Royale who was taking her shift at Cheney's gate, Fry, Kenley, and Sikatron were there playing cards. Everyone. Leonard knocked on the half-closed door and spoke as if he was reciting a poem. Let me introduce this man next to me, Mr. Klein Moretti, who has fully grasped his potion in a month and a half. This guy is so dramatic. Klein suddenly felt awkward. What? Even Sikatron, the author who wasn't famous and barely sold any books, cocked her head sideways as though she was testing her hearing ability. Leonard, don't joke around. You're always exaggerating things. Kenley covered his cards helplessly. Fry held his cards as he looked at Klein. He kept quiet for a while and said, are you sure that you've already fully grasped the potion? Yes. Klein could feel his concern and he nodded confidently. There was an obvious indication. What? Really? Kenley shouted a delayed response and stood up. Leonard chuckled and pointed at the paper in Klein's hands as he said, this is the special application that he's going to hand in. The special application to advance to sequence 8. How did you do it? Sikatron had many questions, but she only voiced the one that concerned her the most after taking a deep breath. She was normally quiet and elegant, but now she had a burning passion in her eyes that couldn't be suppressed. Klein found a chair and sat down. He lowered his voice and answered, I found inspiration from the maxim of the mystery priors. Do as you wish, but do no harm? Leonard supplemented. Yes. According to our confidential information, following this maxim gives the mystery priors a lower probability of losing control. Klein explained what he learned from old Neil. After that, Madame Daly's example gave me a better understanding of the process. Spirit medium Daly? Kenley asked in reply, hoping to gain confirmation. Yes. Madame Daly has handed in a special application before. She only used 2 years to become a spirit medium from corpse collector. She once told old Neil that she wanted to be a real spirit medium, Klein explained in detail. With the experience I gained in the divination club and corresponding feedback that I've received, I gradually concluded my seer principles. Then I followed it strictly and tried to become a real seer. When I did so, I realized that the speed at which I grasped the potion became faster. As they listened to Klein's recount, Fry, Sika, and the rest fell into deep thought. Even Leonard pretended to be thinking. I'm going to hand in my special application. Klein waved the paper in his hands. If you have any problems, do ask me privately. All right, Fry replied coldly with a nod. Klein left the recreation room and knocked on the door to the captain's office again. He sat down opposite to Dunn, then took up a pen and ink pad. He signed and stamped his thumbprint. "Captain, this is my special application." After that, he passed the paper to Dunn with both hands. Dunn looked through it carefully and put down the application. "I'll submit it to the Holy Cathedral as soon as possible. You should be prepared to be examined. Perhaps next week or the following week." "All right." Klein took a deep breath and nodded seriously. He stood up, exited the captain's office, and closed the door behind him. During the process, he thought about the application that he had sent in. There was a thought that popped up in his head. "I wonder what kind of examination it will be." After collecting himself, Klein went down to the basement and walked to Cheney's gate. He knocked on the door to the guard room. Inside, Aurora Reads had already packed her personal belongings. She immediately smoothed her hair and stood up when she saw the person taking over her shift. After greeting each other with a nod, Klein suddenly said, "I've had some success with grasping my potion and have shared my experiences with Fry and the rest. You can ask them about it." Royale, who typically didn't have much of an expression, looked at Klein with a little shock. Her lips quivered a little as she said, "All right. Madam, let's hope that you can still maintain your calm composure in a while. There are already a bunch of dazed people sitting in the recreation room right now." Klein laughed and made his way behind the table, expertly taking out the tin can which Dunn Smith used to store his Fermo coffee. After making himself a cup of aromatic coffee, Klein sat down and relaxed. He looked out at the lonely hallway and allowed his thoughts to roam free. Let's hope that Mr. Azik's mission is successful and that he doesn't leave behind any clues. Well, even if there are clues, I can just pretend to not notice them. I wonder where the mutated sun sacred emblem is sealed behind Cheney's gate. Since it doesn't possess any living qualities, it only needs a little space. Come to think of it, I haven't been inside Cheney's gate. I'm not sure what it looks like inside. To be able to keep the weird sealed artifacts of varying sizes safe and maintain surveillance, it must be quite special indeed. For example, the ashes of Saint Selena? Many thoughts streaked past Klein's head when he suddenly heard urgent footsteps. He focused and shot a look towards the door. He saw old Neil, wearing his classic black robe, appear in the corridor with a black carpet in his hands. He made his way into the guard room and said nothing, but instead observed Klein thoroughly. "Mr. Neil, did something happen?" Klein let out a dry chuckle and took a sip of his fragrant coffee. Old Neil sized him up and sighed. "To think that you would find inspiration from the maxim of the mystery priors and daily. I have to praise the goddess. I also have to thank you for your teachings." Klein gave a reply in all seriousness. Old Neil pulled back a chair and sat down. He said, a little depressed, "How good would it be if it was 20 years ago?" Klein maintained his silence, for he knew that old Neil wasn't allowed to consume any more potions because of his age and health, even if he had completely digested the one he had right now. Under such circumstances, anything he said would have agitated him. "My earliest thoughts was to quickly gain control of my potion from the maxim of the mystery prior, but regrettably, I wasn't embarking in the right direction. Daily success did give me some clues, but I was already more than 50 years old back then, and had already given up on my efforts. I subconsciously thought that her success was a result of her genius, and that an average person wouldn't be able to emulate her achievements." Old Neil rubbed his temples as he described his disappointment. He was silent for a few minutes before he lifted his head. He looked at Klein. "It sure is regrettable that only now do I understand what I've missed out on at this age." Old Neil should have had a faint understanding of the acting method. He immediately understood what happened after I shared my experiences. Klein consoled, "It wouldn't have made too much of a difference. The Church doesn't hold the sequence 8 corresponding to mystery prior. Perhaps the Holy Cathedral does have it. No, if they have it, they would at least tell us its name. It's also possible that the underground market might have it." Old Neil muttered. He shook his head as he stood up. He laughed and said, "At least I didn't lose control, and I've lived healthily for decades. Praise the lady. He drew a crimson moon in front of his chest and left the guard room a little dejected. He had lost his usual shrewd look. Klein looked at old Neil's back and suddenly let out a long sigh. He was even more perplexed as to why the higher-ups of the church would hide the acting method. Klein collected himself after some time, placing his attention on the confidential information of the Nighthawks in front of him. Ever since he pulled the youth from the City of Silver into the Tarot Club and learned that the City of Silver still used the ancient names for many things, he found it necessary to enhance his knowledge in these areas. Some time later, he heard another set of footsteps. These footsteps were slow and steady. At the same time, an image of Dunn Smith wearing a black windbreaker flashed past his mind. My spiritual senses have been elevated after fully digesting the seer potion. Klein nodded in understanding. He saw the captain a few seconds later. A letter for you. Dunn extended his right arm and flicked his wrist, tossing the letter over to Klein. Klein lifted his hand and tried to grab the letter, but be it his judgment or reaction, he missed. Pa. The letter fell onto the floor, leaving Klein's right hand extended awkwardly in the air. Under the suddenly silent atmosphere, his right hand first became rigid, then he pulled it back toward his head and pretended to smooth out his hair. The light from the gas lamp isn't bright enough, Klein made a perfunctory statement casually. He bent his back and picked up the letter, giving it a cursory glance. Mr. Hornaces. It's a letter from Daxter Guderian. He nodded in understanding and pulled open a drawer to retrieve a letter opener. According to the rules of the Nighthawks, if there was a clear and correct recipient, Roseanne and the rest of the clerks would give the letter directly to the person that the letter was addressed to. If the recipient was anonymous or an unknown name, it would be handed over to Dunn. He could then ask around or make a decision. Klein carefully pried open the letter and took out the piece of paper within. He quickly unfolded the piece of paper and read through it. He realized that the asylum doctor, Daxter, was asking for an urgent meeting at 2 in the afternoon today. Has he obtained the telepathist formula? Or is it regarding something else? Klein lifted the letter in his hand and looked at Dunn. Captain, my informant, the one from the psychology alchemists, wishes to meet me at 2 in the afternoon. Did he say anything else? Dunn asked, as if he was expecting this. No. Klein shook his head. Dunn thought for a moment, then said in a heavy voice, Get Leonard to watch over Cheney's gate for the time being. I'll go with you and hide somewhere. These urgent requests to meet could sometimes be a trap. I've heard of many similar incidents. Furthermore, if it's something important, we can act quickly. Captain, you sure are experienced. Not to mention being the most reliable, trustworthy captain without memory issues whenever we have something serious to do. Klein immediately nodded. All right. At 2 in the afternoon. Inside the small shooting range 9 of the Zutland Street Shooting Club. Klein looked at the target that was covered in bullet holes, then glanced at the uneasy Dr. Daxter Guderian. What happened for you to look for mercenaries at the Hound Pub in such a fluster? Only by doing so would the boss of the Hound Pub, right, hand the letter immediately to the Blackthorn Security Company instead of waiting for Klein to collect it himself. Daxter observed Klein's expression and body language, then responded softly, I find Hood-Eugen a little abnormal recently. Hood-Eugen was the patient from the mental asylum that had roped Daxter into the psychology alchemists. What sort of abnormalities has he exhibited? Klein pressed, displaying his professionalism. Daxter heaved a sigh of relief, as if he had found a pillar of support. He said while deliberating his words, He seems to have really gone insane. Really gone insane? Klein asked in shock. Didn't Hood-Eugen feign his illness and infiltrate the mental asylum to attempt to influence the patients in order to train his mental abilities? He had really turned sick, genuine insanity? I think so. Daxter paced around anxiously. I could hold a normal conversation with him in the past and receive guidance on how to correctly use my beyonder powers. But in the past few days, his thought processes and his condition has become really weird. I can barely communicate with him. He was just like my other patients, even though, even though I've managed to get the telepathist formula as a result. But I cannot determine if it's real or fake. I'm afraid that there might be some uncontrollable changes that might occur. No matter. As a seer who has the mysterious world above the gray fog, I'll be able to determine if it's real or fake. Klein heaved a sigh of relief before creasing his brows and asking, did he come into contact with anyone before he turned abnormal? Only the patients. I cannot guarantee that, though. I'm not in the asylum for the whole day. I also need time to rest, Daxter said, his expression serious. Klein nodded, as if it was something trivial. Don't worry. I'll send someone to protect you in secret. You should find out who Hedyugen has come into contact with as soon as possible. Also, you have to be careful, he might be testing you. You should also report this to the members of the psychology alchemists and see how the higher-ups of your organization react. All right. Daxter propped up his golden spectacles, recovering the calm of a spectator. He then took out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over to Klein. This is the formula for the telepathist potion, but I cannot guarantee its authenticity. We will verify it. Klein smiled in response. He unfolded the piece of paper on the spot and looked at it. Main ingredients: the complete pituitary gland of a mature rainbow salamander, 10 milliliters of spinal fluid from a Farsman rabbit. Supplementary ingredients: chestnut spore 5 grams, dragon tooth grass powder 8 grams, 3 petals of pure white elf flowers, pure water 100 milliliters. Excellent, Klein praised. He folded the piece of paper and stuffed it into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. After exchanging a few more words and ascertaining that the voices which Daxter was hearing were subsiding, Klein bade him farewell. He cautiously made his way to the shooting range reserved for the Nighthawks. Dunsmith was waiting inside. Captain, the informant gave me the telepathist formula to thank me for helping him control the side effects of the potion, but he cannot determine the authenticity of the potion. Klein handed the piece of paper to Dunn with a stern expression. Furthermore, he mentioned something else. Dunn read the formula as he listened to the concerns about Hedyugen. After that, he nodded. I'll immediately assign manpower to keep the mental asylum under surveillance. You haven't had professional training when it comes to these matters and don't to participate in this. Go back and guard Cheney's gate. With that said, he looked at Klein deeply in the eyes and said, if we take this formula into account, you don't need to accumulate any more meritorious achievements. You can directly receive the clown potion after you pass the examination. 156 Melissa who takes the long view plus, turn off reset. And I'm paying double for the clown's formula. And all this because I originally wanted to be rewarded double for the same piece of work I did. Forget it, I don't have the opportunity to mention that I already have the formula to the clown potion. Klein took a deep breath and forced a smile, saying, hopefully I can pass the examination smoothly. He was more than happy with Dunn's decision for him to continue to guard Cheney's gate. Not only was he lacking the professional ability to monitor and investigate, but his hand-to-hand combat was far from satisfactory. In terms of shooting, he was considered decent compared to the ordinary police. However, his teammates were all beyonders that have had their physical attributes enhanced. Even if they weren't all marksman level, they were very close. As for hand-to-hand combat, Klein was merely a beginner. Even with a slumber charm, a repose charm, and a dream charm, he was still considered a support class beyonder. It would be easy for him to deal with ordinary people, but he would be in danger if he were to come across any beyonders who were adept at combat. Until I advance to Sequence 8, become skilled in technique-based battles, and master a handful of spells, I can only complete normal supernatural missions on my own. If I successfully steal the power of sealed artifact 3-0782 and make flaring sun charms, that will be even better. It won't be impossible for me to win from a position of an underdog. Klein thought hopefully as he slowly walked back to the Blackthorn Security Company. The next morning when he ended his shift and left Cheney's gate, the Nighthawks still hadn't obtained any useful information from monitoring Hedyugen. For now, they had to place their hopes on their informant's internal investigation. When he returned home, Klein had his breakfast quietly and laid down in his bedroom to sleep until noon. He woke up naturally, washed up, and walked to the first floor, following the smell of cooking food. Melissa is preparing lunch? Klein looked at Benson, who was reading the newspaper in the living room. Benson lowered the newspaper and said, "Yes, she has a guest visiting today. I wanted her to chat with her guest while I prepared lunch. But she doesn't trust my cooking and took the guest into the kitchen." How rude. Benson, you actually managed to quickly realize that Melissa detests your culinary skills. Klein held back his urge to laugh and walked towards the single-seat sofa as he asked, "Melissa's guest?" "Yeah, you should know her. Elizabeth, we met her at Selena's dinner banquet." Benson leaned backwards and continued to read his newspaper comfortably. It wasn't only at the dinner banquet. She came to visit for real. Klein turned to look at the kitchen with a stunned expression. Just then, Melissa walked out carrying some plates and Elizabeth followed behind, also wearing an apron. "Klein, you're already up? I was just planning on waking you up." Melissa laid the plates on the dining table delightedly as she said, "This is Elizabeth. You know her." "Hello, Klein." Elizabeth's adorable face flashed a splendid smile as she greeted him. Klein replied gently and politely. After they greeted, Melissa blinked and spoke seriously, "Elizabeth will follow us to the Family Servant Assistants Association later. They hire a few maidservants at home, so she has experience in that. Her opinions might be helpful. Actually, we've already drawn up the requirements for picking a maidservant. Listen to this and see if there's anything that needs to be added." Melissa wiped her hands on her apron and took out a piece of paper from the pocket of her home clothes. She opened it and read it out loud. 1. Healthy. 2. Hardworking and responsible. 3. Good at cooking. 4. Quiet, not rowdy. 5. Simple family background. 6. Looks ordinary. She read the requirements one by one while Klein and Benson gawked with a vacant look. They never expected that hiring a maidservant would be so troublesome. "Melissa, weren't you against the idea of hiring a maidservant?" Klein subconsciously asked when his sister stopped. Melissa pursed her lips and nodded solemnly. "Yes, I was against it. But as my opposition was in vain, I thought we should get this thing done properly. To be able to get it done well, we must be well prepared." Do you have anything that you'd like to add?" "No." Klein and Benson shook their heads in unison, causing Elizabeth to laugh. After lunch, the four of them took a public carriage to the Tingen Family Servant Assistants Association on Champagne Street. It was similar to domestic help firms that Klein knew of from his previous life, but it was also a little like a charity. They recorded the personal information and job requirements of different maidservants so that the clients could make their selections more easily, while maximizing the maidservant's chances of employment. Part of the organization's funding came from charity organizations, and some came from a percentage of the payment provided by employers. Upon entering the association, Klein and company were greeted warmly. A young lady in a pale yellow ruffled dress led them to some sofas. She smiled and asked, "How may I help you?" Benson, who was pushed forward by his brother and sister, said, "We need to hire a maidservant." "Do you have any requirements?" the young lady asked like clockwork. Benson recalled his siblings' lack of faith in his culinary skills as he said sincerely, "Good at cooking." "Good at cooking?" The young lady creased her eyebrows and said, "To be frank, there are no excellent cooks among the maidservants. Why not hire a chef instead? If you need a female chef, we have quite a number of them in the association." "There is no one who is good at cooking among the maidservants?" Melissa couldn't help but cut in as her initial plan was set back. The young lady nodded and answered affirmatively, "The maidservants are either the daughters of lower-class laborers or girls from the villages. They have few opportunities to learn culinary skills. Even after the simple training provided by the association, the most we can guarantee is that their food won't make people sick." Melissa fell silent, finally realizing what it meant to have situations outpace her plans. "That is regrettable." Benson thought, Reorganizing his words, he said, maybe we can amend our requirement to a maidservant who is willing to and is capable of learning to cook. Not bad. Benson is quick-witted. There's no need for me to interject. Klein sat by the side, holding his cane and hat comfortably. No problem. During cooking training, we took note of girls who had outstanding performance, the young lady replied with a professional smile. Any other requirements? Yes. Benson felt the burn of Melissa's gaze. He swallowed his saliva and took out the piece of paper from his pocket. He then read the items one by one. The young lady listened quietly and only responded after quite a while. I'll first check through the records and recommend some maidservants that fit the criteria. You don't have to decide immediately. You can pick 2 to 4 of them. Then, I will bring them each over to cook for you once. You can decide who to employ then. Of course, you will have to pay the association some extra fees, and you will also have to prepare your own ingredients. All right. Benson folded the paper and nodded politely. The young lady stood up and walked towards the office, but she turned around after taking 2 steps. She smiled and said, "Can you pass me that paper? I'm worried I will forget some of your requirements." No problem. Benson held back his urge to laugh when he answered. After a while, the young lady in the pale yellow dress came out with a stack of documents and passed them to Benson. The information had each of the maidservants' real name, birth date, family situation, facial description, health status, past experience, related traits, expected salary, and other information. Seizing the opportunity when Benson and Melissa were reading the information, Elizabeth got closer to Klein and asked softly, "Don't you have any requirements?" "Yes, but this information isn't specific enough," Klein answered perfunctorily. Elizabeth got even more interested. "How would you choose?" Klein smiled and pointed at the hidden pendulum in his left sleeve. "I would divine the best person to become our maidservant by writing down a corresponding statement about each candidate and eliminating them one after another." Elizabeth was stunned, nodding vacantly after nearly 20 seconds. "The simplest and the most effective way. I totally forgot that you're—" She didn't finish her sentence since Melissa, who had sharp senses, noticed that they were whispering and had looked over. She looked at her best friend and her brother, then she showed an expression of deep thought. "Hey, sis, don't misunderstand. We are just talking normally." Klein coughed and picked up some of the information and casually read through them. Very soon, they picked 3 candidates. They were asking for 4 solely 8 pence to 5 solely 2 pence per week. Benson didn't haggle over the maidservant's pay but instead discussed the percentage that he needed to pay to the association. After some friendly haggling, he successfully negotiated the price from the maidservant's 2 weeks' pay to 1 week pay instead. However, he had to pay a transportation fee of 1 solely for them to bring the maidservants over to try cooking. After that, Elizabeth bade the trio farewell and left while the siblings took a public carriage back to Daffodil Street. On the way back, Klein was getting uncomfortable under Melissa's scrutinizing gaze. When he got home, he went to the 2nd floor directly. "Klein," Melissa called him in a serious tone after thorough consideration. She said, "If you want to get engaged with Elizabeth, you have to work harder. Her father is an import merchant, and her mother is the daughter of a baron." "Wait, engaged? When did this happen?" Klein looked at his sister in confusion. "How far-reaching is her concern?" "No, we are not." Klein didn't have the chance to retort before Benson interrupted with a smile. "Although Elizabeth is indeed a little young and her family is much more outstanding than ours, I find the 2 of you quite suitable for each other. But you might have to wait a few more years. She is still studying at a public school and wants to enter university. Marriage should be something to consider only 6 to 7 years later. Of course, you can get engaged sooner than that. Can you guys not think that far ahead?" Klein took in a deep breath. "I do not fancy Elizabeth, or, well, more accurately, I do not fancy a girl who is younger than me by too much. I prefer girls who are more mature. Truthfully, I can accept anyone within a reasonable age gap, just not now." He added inwardly in exasperation. You like girls who are more mature? Melissa knitted her brows. Then you should quickly settle the issue regarding your marriage. Ah? Klein couldn't understand his sister's leap in logic. He asked in confusion, why? Melissa explained seriously, you will be about 25 when you finish saving up for your marriage. Girls that are more mature than you will either be married or engaged when they reach that age. Do you want to chase after a widow? What the? Klein thought to himself in Mandarin as he wore a blank expression. Benson smiled and refuted his sister, Melissa, you don't understand. In this day and age, it isn't rare to see women in their 30s who isn't married or engaged within the middle class. They are mostly followers of the goddess, and all have the ability to provide for themselves. They would rather be single than stuck in a marriage that they are not satisfied with. Yes, that's what I read from the family magazine. Is that so? Melissa was a 16-year-old girl after all. She didn't have a great understanding concerning matters like this. Upon seeing his siblings getting roused up from the conversation, Klein coughed and said, what I meant by mature is their mental state. They don't need to be older than me. Furthermore, the person that should be worried about their marriage is Benson. I'm sorry, brother, I had no choice, he apologized in his heart. Melissa froze for a moment, then nodded heavily. That's right. Benson was just about to elaborate on the marital problems of the middle class when he suddenly shivered. He looked at his sister who was staring at him and said, I am now at the cusp of a turning point in my life. I have to devote all my attention to studying. I will only be confident of chasing after my desired girl when I have found a job that I'm satisfied with and have a reasonable amount of savings. Only then will I be able to provide her with a good life. Klein and Melissa froze, then asked in unison, you have a girl that you fancy? Benson, who had merely given a perfunctory reply, was shocked. He shook his head in a hurry. No. I was merely giving an example. In a dark, gloomy house of Backland, Hillston Borough. A middle-aged man with graying hair sat silently on a rocking chair in front of an unlit fireplace with a dark-colored pipe in his hand. He looked at the guest on the sofa. He was the master of this building, Isengard Stanton, a private detective with notable fame. But he didn't set up an office, merely hiring assistants to assist him. Isengard, who was dressed in a white shirt and black vest, brought the pipe to his lips and inhaled in an intoxicated manner before slowly exhaling. The fee for a 30-minute consultation is £1. If I were you, I would definitely not waste a second. The two ladies on the sofa across from him were Furs Wall and Xiaoderi Cha. They had found materials relating to Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos and wanted to ask this detective to consolidate the habits and actions of their target. Of course, they had removed Kalangos's name and changed the description regarding supernatural incidents. Xiaoderi Cha handed the folder containing the documents to Isengard's assistant, a brown-haired young man wearing gold-framed spectacles. Mr. Detective, I hope that you can find habits in the target's actions using the material we have provided. Even though she wasn't tall, Xiaoderi Cha had an air of authority when she sat straight and spoke with a deep voice. Isengard stared at her and received the docket from his assistant. He opened the folder and took out the material within. He set down his pipe and focused on reading page after page without missing a single one. 10 minutes later, this gentleman slowly tapped on the handle. The target has an obsession with the wind. He won't stay for long in a polluted area in Backland, the capital of dust. In other words, he could be staying at the Empress Borough, West Borough, Hillston Borough, Sherwood Borough, or the suburbs of the North Borough. The target is a psychotic serial killer with the need to kill someone every other day. The most logical thing he could do is to target the vagrants that have nowhere to go. Even the police have no records of the exact number of vagrants in Backland. The target wouldn't be living in an area too near or too far from North Borough or Backland Bridge, which have the highest concentration of vagrants. It would be the act of someone unsophisticated to search for victims that are too close to him. That isn't consistent with your descriptions. If the target has to spend a large amount of time before he can find someone to murder, then he might lose control of his desires and commit crimes that would easily expose himself. The target is an experienced sailor and has exceptional mobility in the water. A reasonable deduction would be that he wouldn't be living somewhere too far away from the water. If anything unexpected happens, that would be his best means of escape. In summary, we can outline the possible radius of activity for the target. He should be living somewhere close to the Backland Bridge area. Perhaps somewhere close to both banks of the Tussock River, the West Burrow or the Cherwood Burrow. I can only deduce this from the materials that you have given me. Even though they didn't understand all of it, his deductions seemed to make sense. Zio and Furs looked at each other and nodded. They took back their materials and stood up to leave. Seeing his assistant send off the two ladies, Isengard took out a bronze item from his vest pocket. It was an open paperback book. In the middle of the book was a vertical eye. Isengard rocked his chair, rubbing the item while softly muttering to himself, "Kalangos has infiltrated Backland?" In a particular basement of Pritz Harbor. The hanged man Alger sat in a chair, looking coldly at a struggling man. This man was dressed like a sailor. His head was enveloped by a film of pale blue water and his face was purple from holding his breath. He was scratching at the film on his face with both hands, but all he could do was flick droplets of liquid. Finally, he could no longer hold his breath and gave a signal of submission. Alger smiled, then nonchalantly clapped his hands. The thin film of water dispersed, turning into droplets that fell to the ground. The sailor took in a deep breath and coughed violently. He coughed so hard that it tugged at his heart and lungs. After waiting for the man to recover, Alger leaned back. He emulated the peaceful and calm tone of the fool. "Tell me the reason why Kalangos went to Backland. He's there to complete a commission, but I'm not sure about the details." The pirate had completely lost the will to resist. He answered honestly, "All I know is that he might receive something that he wants. Kalangos once boasted in front of us. He said that if this mission was a success, he would be able to obtain something he's dreamed of getting for a long time. The 4 pirate kings would then become the 5 pirate kings. An object he's been dreaming of obtaining?" Alger knitted his brows and slipped into deep thought. Klein didn't rest on Monday morning. He followed his plan and continued his investigation on the buildings with red chimneys in Tingen. Unfortunately, he didn't come across his target. He returned home near noon. He heated up the leftovers from yesterday's dinner and paired them with bread before taking an hour's nap. At about 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, Klein put his book down and sealed his room with a wall of spirituality, once again entering the mysterious world above the gray fog. He sat at the seat of honor at the ancient bronze table, extending his hand toward the crimson star representing sun while ignoring the frequency of his heartbeats. In the city of silver, Derek Berg was sweating on the practice grounds. His vision suddenly blurred as a heavy fog entered his view. He saw the fool sitting high above, deep within the fog. He froze, then stopped whatever he was doing and bowed his head. When the illusion vanished, he counted his heartbeats silently and carried his silver sword to a rest area quickly. 1,000 heartbeats later, he locked himself in a bathroom. After about 10 breaths, he saw the red light swell over him and swallow him in an instant. Above the gray fog, Klein leaned back into his chair and tapped his left molar twice to stealthily activate his spirit vision. He saw that the mottled color deep within the sun's ether body had turned pure, akin to the light of dawn. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Bard." At the same time, he saw the stars behind the sun's chair shift quickly, turning into the symbol of the sun. It transformed without my will, as if it was a reflection of the sun. Also, other than the palace, table, and chairs, the items that I conjure cannot be preserved once I leave this world. They are very special. There sure are many secrets to this world above the gray fog. Klein took in everything in front of him as he contemplated. Derek lowered his head and replied humbly, "This is all due to your assistance. This is but the beginning." He wasn't surprised that the fool knew that he had consumed the potion. Klein took out his silver pocket watch and looked at the time. He chuckled and said, "Then let us start the gathering. Remember, the frequency, or should I say gap between the gatherings should be about the same in the future." As he was speaking, he established a connection with the crimson stars representing justice and the hanged man before pulling them into the majestic palace. Audrey looked at the scene before her and immediately greeted him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. I have a page of the diary of Emperor Roselle with me." "Good afternoon, Mr. Sunday. Have you gotten the formula for telepathist? How enviable it is for Miss Justice to always maintain a cheerful mood. I wish I could be like that." Listening to her lively greetings, Klein couldn't help but sigh wistfully. He then recalled the time when she had taken out £1,000 so easily, and he realized that it would be very difficult if he wanted to maintain his cheerful emotions like Miss Justice. The son, Derek Berg, was a young man that cared a lot about his reputation. He immediately replied, "I have obtained the telepathist formula." For the past week, he had been settling the inheritance that his parents had left him. Besides the property, furniture, and a few sentimental items, the rest of the valuable items were brought to the black market in the City of Silver in exchange for the telepathist formula and the Bard potion's ingredients. His meals were now rationed. However, he believed that the situation wouldn't be for long. When he passes the combat examination, he would then join the team that cleansed the things of the dark in the outskirts of the city and be paid a decent amount. "When I become stronger, I'll apply to become a member of the elite squad, to explore the depths of the dark and find a way to remove the curse." Derek thought with hope as he looked towards the fool who was engulfed in the fog. He noticed that last time, after Miss Justice made a request to Mr. Fool, she was able to produce a page of the unknown Roselle diary out of thin air. Although Derek didn't quite understand what had happened, he felt that it'd be better if he watched Mr. Fool. First, recall the formula in your head. Then, grab the pen by your side and instill it with the strong desire to express your thoughts. Klein casually leaned back in his high chair. As the sun was from the City of Silver, which might be the forsaken land of the gods, the pen that instantiated before him wasn't a fountain pen, but a quill instead. Of course, there still wasn't any ink. Derek didn't dare to doubt what the fool said, so he immediately grabbed the quill that suddenly appeared by his hand. He followed the fool's instruction, and as expected, he saw the telepathist potion formula appear on the brown goatskin parchment before him within seconds. After looking through it twice, Derek silently pushed the promised item towards Miss Justice. Audrey was overjoyed and eager, but she took the parchment gracefully. She glanced at the page, and the words that Klein had translated came into sight. Main ingredients: Phantom Netherdrake's complete pituitary gland, 10 milliliters of half-spectre rabbit. Supplementary ingredients. Main ingredients that I've never heard of. I don't know enough. Audrey, who had been trying to learn more about the different types and names of Beyonder ingredients from Furs and Zio, seemed to fret in thought. During such moments, she would completely forget how a spectator should behave. Suddenly, Audrey heard a light rapping sound. She quickly looked towards the seat of honor at the long bronze table subconsciously. She was surprised to see Mr. Fool rapping at the edge of the table with his right index finger while he gestured to her with a nod. What's going on? Audrey was confused as her eyes wore a vacant look. Just when she was about to ask, the corner of her eyes suddenly saw some changes on the telepathist formula. There were remarks next to some of the ingredients. Main ingredients: Phantom Netherdrake's complete pituitary gland, also known as rainbow salamander, 10 milliliters of half-spectre rabbit, also known as Farsman rabbit. Supplementary ingredients. I know all of these. Audrey was stunned at first, then there was an intense surge of delight from the bottom of her heart. Thank you, Mr. Fool. You're really very knowledgeable. She looked towards the seat of honor as she thanked and sincerely complimented him. The hanged man Alger didn't know what had happened, but he felt extreme contempt towards what Justice had said. How could you describe a godlike figure with the word knowledgeable? His existence alone is equivalent to knowledge itself to a certain extent. Klein accepted Miss Justice's compliments without any misgivings because this wasn't something he could have done just because he had chanced upon the psychology alchemist's telepathist formula. After he pulled the sun into the tarot club, he had been taking precautions against such problems by taking into consideration the sun's special circumstances of being from the City of Silver. He had been constantly studying ancient terminology. Therefore, even if Daxter Guderian hadn't managed to get the formula in time, he could have made the notations easily. Through prior divination and comparison, he had made certain that both telepathist formulas were accurate. This is why we say, preparedness averts peril. Klein thought smugly. Audrey looked at the telepathist formula a few times and then reined in her gaze unwillingly. She then personally expressed Roselle's diary onto a page. You deserve this. She put down her pen and looked towards the fog-engulfed fool. In addition to this, I'll give your adorer another 300. Is £300 okay? She sounded a little guilty because the 3 pages of Roselle's diary only cost her £20, while the sheriff formula at Sequence 8 required £450. In other words, from the perspective of simple math, she had to pay another £430 on top of the 3 pages of the diary. However, Audrey felt that it was thanks to her luck that the seller didn't know the value of Roselle's diary. It allowed her to buy it at a low price. Emperor Roselle's diary costs at least £50 per page. Audrey held her fist and encouraged herself. £300? Until today, I've only seen that much money at Sir Deweyville's place. Klein sighed and pretended to not be interested in money as he nodded and said, a reasonable deal. This is my adorer's information. He avoided speaking of terms like backland bank and anonymous account verbally through the fool's mouth as they damaged his image. He made them appear on the parchment before her. Klein had taken time to visit Backland Bank's Tingen branch last Wednesday while investigating the houses with red chimneys. He had disguised himself and opened an anonymous bank account. The account only required one to memorize his account number and the corresponding password in order to withdraw cash from any Backland Bank branch. If one found that it wasn't secure enough, he could also request to add in a signature and thumbprint verification. But that would be more troublesome. In order to keep his identity secret, Klein left it with a password. The password is written in ancient Hermes, the fool that doesn't belong to this era, the mysterious ruler above the grey fog, the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. As ancient Hermes itself can be used for rituals and prayers, anyone who dares to copy the password would be reciting my name. Then, I'll immediately receive a signal, and can simply find out who's the one trying to steal my wealth from the world above the grey fog. Klein was very satisfied with the idea that he came up with. The only downfall was that it would slightly expose the existence of the fool, but the risk was within an acceptable range. Audrey pushed the diary page to Mr. Fool as she took the parchment with the information of the fool's adorer. Recorded on it was the Backland Bank and a bunch of numbers that formed the anonymous bank account. I wonder if Mr. Fool's adorer is a male or female, and which sequence he or she is. He must be very powerful, at least not weaker than Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. Audrey couldn't stop her thoughts from wandering. But she quickly focused and memorized the anonymous account. It doesn't have to be so troublesome. Just then, she heard the fool's low yet gentle voice. When you get home, recite my name and you'll be able to write down the information directly. This would be just like when I drew the red chimney scene through divination. An account number is very important, you can't memorize it incorrectly. Klein added in his head. That works too? From Mr. Fool's words, he appears very confident. He lives up to his status of a godlike figure if he can even do this. Audrey was stunned at first before coming to the realization that everything seemed to make logical sense. But, why did I have to memorize the formula earlier? Audrey was suddenly confused again. At that moment, Klein pressed down on the page of Roselle's diary, but he wasn't in a hurry to read it. He looked to the side at the sun and calmly asked, "What compensation would you like?" Derek thought seriously and said, "As of now, I don't have anything that I desperately need. I should digest the Bard potion very soon. I shall wait until then to request my compensation. Yes, perhaps to prepare for the corresponding Sequence 8 formula or the necessary ingredients. Sequence 8 is light suppliant, which I have, but the ingredients. Even if I had them, I would have no idea how to give them to you." Wait, he used the word digest. Indeed, the City of Silver knows of the acting method. The highest sequence there is only sequence 4, so are they limited by ingredients? Klein nodded in deep thought, agreeing to the deal. Audrey also sharply noticed the word digest. She weighed her words and asked, Mr. Sun, are you aware of the acting method? Derek looked at Miss Justice in confusion and answered straightforwardly, it's nothing strange. The general education classes in the City of Silver teaches the acting method. The acting method is taught in general education classes. Audrey stole a glance at the hanged man and realized that he was looking back at her. The two of them suddenly fell silent. The origin of the sun is indeed mysterious. I wonder where Mr. Fool pulled him into the tarot club from. The more I think about it, the more I revere him. Audrey settled down and looked at the fool, who didn't look visibly surprised in any way. Then, Alger probed, Mr. Sun, do you talk about any key things to look out for with respect to the acting method? Yes. Derek nodded without hesitation. It's clearly stated in our general education classes that the one and only key point for the acting method is to remember that you're only acting. As expected. We're using an ingenious method to go around obstacles and completely break down the remnant spirits in the potion, without submitting to it. The Sun, you're such a simple boy. You just shared important information by accident. Klein smiled and cast his eyes on the diary page before him. Messy Chinese sentences were scribbled on the yellowish-brown goatskin. August 2nd. This goes deeper than I imagined. History sure is something that can be manipulated easily. August 5th. I witnessed the abilities of a high-sequence beyonder today. It was scary indeed. There's a qualitative change that has happened to them in a particular aspect. It was as though they've transformed into a deity. It's no wonder that we describe them as demigods, though I think calling them legendary beings is more fitting. August 6th. There's something strange going on. Why would the 7 major churches adopt such a strange attitude towards the potions? At the low to middle sequences, they not only provide the main ingredients to those who manage to advance, but they're also generous enough to share the formulas and demonstrate the process needed to create the potion. They would also explain in detail if a ritual is needed to create the medicine, yet finished potions are the only things they provide to those who are advancing to the higher sequences. This isn't logical. Shouldn't they keep the formula a secret for the lower sequence potions and give the candidate the completed potion, since it's relatively easy to gather the necessary ingredients and create the potion? As for the higher sequence potions, shouldn't they share the formula and make the promising member search for the ingredients due to the difficulty of obtaining the main ingredients? There must be some hidden secret to this. August 9th. The events of the past 2 days have made me feel uncomfortable. I started the Industrial Revolution with my own hands and personally ushered in the age of steam and machinery, but this will create the conditions necessary for the evil god to descend upon this world? What does he mean? The conditions necessary for the evil god to descend upon this world? Klein knitted his brows, his index finger tapped on the edge of the ancient table. Did Mr. Fool encounter a difficult problem? Anything that can trouble him must be something of another level. Audrey looked at the leader obscured by the thick fog and interpreted his state through his body language. Klein was indeed pondering over the problem related to the upper echelons, but he didn't arrive at an answer. He considered the possibility of using divination to gain some sort of revelation. Yes, it would be impossible to divine something of use with such simple sentences. I'm not a prophet. What if I divine with the statement, the conditions necessary for the evil god to descend upon this world? It feels too risky. The evil god might not be as horrifying as the eternal blazing sun, but its abilities might be much more mysterious. It might be able to trace the divinations back to me. There's also no way to divine how large of a risk I'll be taking if I were to divine that statement. After all, just divining if something poses any danger is dangerous once it has deities involved. I'll keep this question in mind and put more effort into observation. The arrangement of the churches regarding potions is indeed mysterious. I wonder what kind of secrets they're hiding. Perhaps I'll receive some hints about that one spirit medium, spirit guide daily is made archbishop or a high-ranking deacon and enters the core of the church. Roselle's description does make me look forward to the power of high-sequence Beyonders. Many thoughts flashed through his mind before Klein stopped tapping on the edge of the ancient table and looked at Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Sun. You can start your discussion freely now. Alger immediately said, Mr. Fool, Miss Justice, I received a new piece of information. Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos infiltrated Baklan to complete a difficult mission. He might stay for an extended period of time and create an appalling tragedy. Also, I know that this incident involves a very important item, an item that would allow Kalangos to quickly become a high-sequence Beyonder. Quickly become a high-sequence Beyonder? Does he not fear losing control of himself? Audrey asked, adopting the posture of a spectator. Kalangos was only a sequence 6 wind blast, so there was still a sequence between him and sequence 4. Alger had expected this question. He answered honestly, that's why the object is important to him. Of course, those are simply my deductions. The information I received goes like this: Kalangos believes that once he completes the commission and obtains the object, he will be the equal of Nast, the king of the 5 seas. The 4 pirate kings would then become the 5 pirate kings, and the 7 pirate admirals will be reduced to 6. The average person might not aware of this, but as Beyonders, we should know that pirate kings are either high-sequence Beyonders, or are able to reach the combat strength of a high-sequence Beyonder with the use of Beyonder boats and mysterious items. For Kalangos to be acknowledged as their equal, he must reach standards that are close to that. That's my deduction. All I know is that the king of the 5 seas, Nast, is a sequence 4 Beyonder, but I'm not sure of the name of his potion. Klein listened on silently, not giving his opinion. The son, Derek Berg, didn't understand anything the Hanged Man said. He didn't know who was who, but he still listened attentively. He felt a new door had presented itself in his world. Pirates? The place they live in has seas that are mentioned in books. Then, the environment these people live in is very different from the City of Silver. They don't seem to be very worried about the curse or the attacks of the things of the dark. It definitely makes me very curious. But, Mr. Fool once instructed me not to ask about the secrets of others. It's a very rude gesture. Derek thought in his heart, once again observing the Hanged Man and Justice. Your deduction is very reasonable. Of course, that could also be a mysterious item that could hold its own against a high-sequence Beyonder, Justice replied with a smile. The Hanged Man looked at the fog-enshrouded fool, pondered over his words, before he looked at Justice and emphasized, there are 2 key points in what I said just now, the first being the fact that Kalangos will stay in Bakland for some time. The second is that the incident involves a very important and very mysterious object. So, Mr. Fool, are you not tempted? There is ample time for you to send your adorer to Bakland. Alger added in his heart but didn't dare say it out loud. All he could do was beat about the bush. Mr. Alger, you don't need to emphasize this repeatedly, I know what you are getting at. But my abilities do not allow me to interfere in these matters. Furthermore, I can't leave Tingen without permission. Klein leaned back and thought in frustration. Ignoring the adorer, I can actually find 2 relatively strong Beyonders to help. One is Daly, who has advanced to sequence 6, but I cannot tell her everything. The most I can do is mention that I've gotten some information that Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos has infiltrated Bakland and is living at a particular street and what he plans to do. That way, Daly might directly enlist the help of the Nighthawks, making the situation very complicated and troublesome. If you guys cannot find anybody to help you when the time comes, then I can try that to prevent a tragedy. The second person is Mr. Azik, but I cannot expose my identity as the fool to him. I don't have a proper reason to get him to interfere with this incident. Many thoughts flashed through his mind as Klein replied slowly, I'm aware. Seeing how the fool continued to not place much importance in the matter regarding Kalangos, he sighed and held back his disappointment. He started asking about the investigation Miss Justice conducted last week. In conclusion, we have more or less targeted the general area Kalangos will be at, and will soon start the next phase of investigations. Audrey first gave a simple summary, then with the attitude that she was doing something important, said, we need more information, preferably the hobbies and habits of Kalangos. Alger recalled, he loves fish, especially fish from the sea. He would slice it and eat it raw. He also likes hard liquor, and despises champagne, red wine, and the like. He will often look for women to relieve his needs whenever he heads to shore, and with his strong body, one woman will not be enough to satisfy him. He's used to using cold weapons and avoids hot weapons. He cannot be away from water for long periods of time. What I mean is that he needs to swim or dive once every couple of days. Audrey committed these facts to memory, creating an ample character of Kalangos in her mind. Let's hope that the investigation will be a success. It's a pleasure working with you. She smiled after Alger was done. My pleasure. All Alger could do was force himself to believe in Miss Justice, who had considerable power in Backland. Throughout the interaction, Klein seemed to be listening intently, but in reality, his thoughts had been diverted to another question. That was the question of how to deliver ingredients to Sun if he did manage to obtain them. Now that he had a passable understanding of the field of mysticism, Klein instinctively followed the line of thought of using ritualistic magic. This reliance was natural given the successes he had when using ritualistic magic. When I was previously flipping through the confidential information of the Nighthawks, I came across records of the goddess bestowing holy items to her followers. There were also records of items descending in rituals involving evil gods or devils. Does this mean that I can bestow someone something when responding to their prayers, and transfer materials that way? In previous attempts, I could only reply with thoughts containing pictures and voices. But that doesn't mean that it'll always stay that way. There could be some new changes when I advance to Sequence 8. There's also something important to consider. Can I bring material from the real world into the world above the gray fog? And... Oh right, there's often a step for sacrifices in rituals involving evil gods and devils. Can I consider sacrificing something to myself? In that way, perhaps I can bring some material from the real world into the world above the gray fog. If this attempt is successful, I can get items directly from Justice, the Sun, and the Hanged Man, and then bestow them to myself. Yes, sacrifice is considered a more advanced ritual, so I won't be able to learn of it for now. The most important thing to do now is to improve my abilities. Klein reined in his thoughts, and once again listened in on the conversation of the other members. He listened as their discussion changed from Kalangos to the characteristics of particular monsters. Some time later, he smiled. Let's end it here for today. By your will. The Sun, Justice, and the Hanged Man stood up at the same time. After severing the connections of the members, Klein quickly descended from the fog and left the mysterious space. When he returned to his room, he dispelled the wall of spirituality and pulled back the curtains by the oriel window, allowing the sunlight to shine in. There are 2 important things to do this week. The first is to get examined and advance to Sequence 8. The second is to make flaring sun charms. Its powers might be even higher than that of Sequence 7 or 6. Klein looked outside with anticipation. Tomorrow. I should be able to receive the report of Mr. Azik's paranormal disturbances tomorrow. Tuesday morning. Having completed his mysticism curriculum, Klein didn't look for a quiet corner to read Comparison of Ancient and Modern Names or Nighthawk's Case Compendium, and instead stayed in the break room to play cards with Leonard, Kenley, and Royale. I only told Mr. Azik to create an opportunity for me to take sealed artifact 3-0782 out. It'll still depend on my improvisation skills to seize the opportunity. Klein's mind wasn't on his cards, so he played terribly. He lost 5 solely in an hour, and he felt the pinch. He planned to concentrate on the game to recover some of his cash. After he bought various ingredients for the flaring sun charms yesterday afternoon, his private stash of cash reduced to less than £1 once again. Plus, he had to pay 2 solely every day for the carriage rental fees to search for the house with the red chimney. As they were waiting for Kenley to shuffle the cards, he picked up the copper penny before him and spun it casually. He suddenly felt Royale's gaze on him, a very intense gaze. What? Klein was first stunned, then looked at the copper penny that was about to fall. Is she wary of me cheating with divination? We're just playing cards amongst ourselves, do we have to be so serious about this? He suddenly understood and slammed down the penny with a dry laugh. Just then, Dunsmith knocked on the door and entered. He looked around and said, "There's a situation in Morristown. Leonard, please handle it." Morristown? Klein felt his mind jolt as he pretended to ask curiously, "Captain, what kind of situation?" Dunn glanced over and explained, "Recently, there have been a few paranormal cases in the area. Firstly, people would hear sobs when walking past the cemetery and see vague figures flash by. Then, a widow encountered her deceased husband when she woke up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. She nearly fainted from the fright. In addition, there was an elderly man who lived alone. He began hearing heavy footsteps reverberating in the house all the time. However, silence reigned once again the moment he lights a candle or gas lamp. The people in the town are believers of the goddess, so the local priest reported the situation. No one got hurt, and it almost borders on the level of a prank. It should be Mr. Azik." Klein used an expression and tone that he had rehearsed many times. "Captain, there might be a secret link for these paranormal cases to happen so suddenly. In this situation, divination could provide an important clue. I think I can help Leonard." Upon hearing that, Leonard's green eyes immediately locked onto Klein. He was apparently trying to find clues and traces from Klein's face. Dunn nodded first, but remained quiet and hesitant. When Klein saw the captain's response, he immediately added, "Some of these things might require ritualistic magic to purify them." "Makes sense." Dunn thought and said, "You and Leonard will head to Morristown then." Without anyone saying anything else, he additionally added, You won't be able to make it for your combat training in the afternoon. I'll send someone to inform Gawain." "Phew, the first step is complete." Klein silently let out a sigh. He quickly packed away his soldi and pence. Then, he suddenly paused and looked sideways at Dunn. He said solemnly, "Captain, I think we should prepare for the worst. If there's a powerful wraith behind the paranormal events, it might be very dangerous for only Leonard and I. Plus, it takes 3 hours to get to Morristown, right? Even if we manage to send a telegram to request for backup in time, we would still have to hold out for quite a while." "So?" Dunn interrupted. "I want to get the assistance of another teammate." Klein pretended to think for a moment and said, "And, according to the rules, a mission with 3 or more Nighthawks involved can apply for a level 3 sealed artifact. Yes, 3-0782 is most suited for this job." Upon hearing that, Leonard laughed and said, "Exactly your style. Careful, cautious, taking no risks. You seem to be implying that I'm a coward." "I'm a person who looked directly at the eternal blazing sun." Klein pretended that he didn't hear Leonard and earnestly looked at Dunsmith. "Captain, what do you think? We should really take extra care against any accidents. There have been too many coincidences lately." Dunn nodded thoughtfully and looked at the other 2 teammates. "Kenley, join Leonard and Klein on their trip to Morristown. Oh, hurry up and write an application. After I sign it, retrieve sealed artifact 3-0782 from Cheney's Gate." "All right," the short Kenley said, putting down the cards in his hand. "All right." Klein fist pumped in his mind while he looked anxious and solemn on the outside. At that very moment, Seekatron was monitoring Hadeugen in the asylum while Fry was on duty at Cheney's Gate. Klein left the recreation room and put on his black tuxedo. He took his hat and cane, then waited together with Leonard for Kenley at the stairway that connected to the basement. There was no one there, and it was extremely quiet. Leonard suddenly looked sideways at Klein and said, "I think you'd better give up on any unrealistic dreams." What?" Klein replied in confusion. Leonard walked forward and stood by the edge of the stairs. He looked into the darkness of the stairway. "Even during a mission, it will be impossible for you to discover my secret and understand my uniqueness. Bro, can you stop thinking so highly about yourself? Did you think I applied for this mission to spy on you? I didn't even have such thoughts." Enlightened, Klein chuckled, How can you be so sure that my uniqueness won't help to reveal your secret? Leonard's expression grew grave, but he then smiled and said, It will, huh? I shall wait for you to discover it then. When I gather more information and items, I will go to the world above the gray fog to help you do a divination. You're welcome. Klein thought sarcastically in his head. Soon, the small-framed Kenley brought the mutated sun's sacred emblem up the winding stairs. When Klein felt the unique warmth and purity, he secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that he had finally completed the very first and most difficult step in his plan of siphoning the powers of the eternal blazing sun's divine blood. Then, the three of them left the Blackthorn Security Company and walked to Zutland Street. They walked towards the carriage that belonged to the Nighthawks. Will the purifying effect bother the horse? Kenley suddenly asked anxiously. I don't want a horse that can only praise the sun to pull the carriage. He had been a Nighthawk for longer than Klein, but he was far from experienced. No, sealed artifact 3-0782 only purifies living entities with a high level of intelligence. Klein lowered his voice in response. If not, I wouldn't be bitten by insects, he added blankly in his head. Oh, I see. Haha, I didn't read the information thoroughly enough. Kenley pressed down on his black silk hat and laughed in enlightenment. As Klein had yet to master the skill of driving of a carriage, he sat inside the carriage for the following 3 hours. He rubbed the sealed artifact 3-0782 in his hand while he watched Leonard and Kenley take turns driving. They finally arrived at Morristown around lunchtime. How beautiful. Kenley complimented sincerely as they stepped down from the carriage and looked towards the boundless golden wheat fields that surrounded the town. The dates representing the volcanic constellation was coming to an end, and the bumper harvest constellation was going to rule everyone's life. Leonard was in the driver's seat as he looked around and opened his mouth, as though he was going to recite a sonnet. But in the end, he only spurted one sentence, how beautiful. Klein held back the urge to laugh as he put on his top hat, took his cane, and got off the carriage. At that moment, a middle-aged man in a black priest's gown walked over. He drew a crimson moon on his chest and said, Praise the Lady. Are you the friends that St. Selena Cathedral sent to help us? Yes, priest sire. May the goddess bless you. Leonard jumped off the carriage and replied with a smile, We're here to take care of the recent paranormal incidents. Seemingly. The gray-haired, blue-eyed sire saw many townsfolk approaching as he quickly emphasized. Morristown wasn't big. Regardless of which direction one chose to travel in, one would enter the plains within 10 minutes. The people who stayed there knew each other, so what happened earlier had spread. Many townsfolk were waiting for the Church of the Evernight Goddess to send people to resolve the problem. Hence, when they saw that the priest was greeting 3 strangers, they quickly surrounded them out of concern and curiosity. Some tiptoed and some tried to hear what they were saying. Leonard chuckled and said, Priest, don't worry. We're professionals. Look, we brought holy water, silver daggers, dark sacred emblems, and also garlic. He took out the described items from the inner pockets of his clothes as though he was pulling a magic trick. Garlic? Are you trying to stink the spirits to death? Klein found it ridiculous yet funny as he watched Leonard's performance. Sire wore a look of confusion, and he even started to suspect that the St. Selena Cathedral had sent over a bunch of frauds. The citizens who surrounded them revealed gratified smiles, as though they were finally in safe hands. Leonard got close to Priest Sire and explained softly into his ear, They believe in these things. Without waiting for the priest's reply, he added, Let's have lunch at the church first. Then, we shall take care of those matters. Yes, lunch is very important. When those paranormal incidents are taken care of, it'll be time to take turns looking after sealed artifact 3-0782, and also the opportunity for me to make flaring sun charms. Hopefully, everything goes smoothly. Of course, making flaring sun charms during the daytime would get the best results. Klein thought, brimming with anticipation.